Radio on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM in Winnipeg. I'm Emily Brass, in this week for Marcy Markusa. With me are Pat Kanuga, our show director, and our studio technician, Abby Adeyemi. Heather Wells is in the newsroom with headlines.
Good morning. Well, cancelled home care visits and time restraints have prompted a woman in St. Andrews to hire her own home care workers. Joanne Brown coordinates her mom's care under Manitoba's Self and Family Managed Care program. Home care traditionally is provided through the province's regional health authorities, but Brown started managing her mom's care because she could no longer rely on the local health authority. We'll hear more. And the board president of the Manitoba Dental Association is excited about the federal government's new dental plan, but Dr. Scott Leckie also worries how it's going to roll out. He wishes the government had consulted dentists earlier. We'll hear from him in our next local news at 6:30.
Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
That's CBC's Heather Wells. Also joining us in the studio today is Travis Peterson, our YouTube producer at CBC Manitoba. Hello to everyone joining us online. Here's what's coming up on the first hour of the show. The Forks Winter Trail is on thin ice, literally. We'll check in about when folks can expect to start skating at the Forks amidst unseasonably high temperatures. We'll also hear from parliamentary reporter for the National Post, Ryan Tumulty. He'll join us to talk about the final countdown to the end of this fall session of the House of Commons. Members of Parliament are preparing to return home for the holidays at the end of the week. But first on the show, the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Dubai is wrapping up with a struggle over the final agreement and whether it'll include a pledge to end the use of fossil fuels. We'll get the latest from Warren Mabey of Queen's University. That's all coming up on Information Radio. Quick look at the forecast for Winnipeg today. A mix of sun and clouds with a high of -7. A bit breezy this morning. Then tonight, mainly clear, going down to a low of -11. Tomorrow, mainly sunny with a high of -2. For Thursday, sunny and mild, going up to a high of +3. Breezy in the morning and afternoon, actually. And for Friday, a mix of sun and clouds with a high of +1. You're listening to Information here on CBC Radio 1. World Report is up next.
Today on Q with Tom Power.
Ziwei has made a career examining the line between comedy and confrontation, especially when it comes to race. Ziwei will be here to talk about her new book and why asking, how many black friends do you have, is such a revealing question.
It's almost like a cultural litmus test.
That's coming up on Q, followed by Commotion with Elamine Abdel Mahmoud on CBC Radio 1, the CBC Listen app, and everywhere you get your podcasts.
A symbolic vote about the future. This is World Report. Good morning from CBC News. I'm John Northcott. A symbolic vote about the future of Gaza will take place at the United Nations today. The UN General Assembly will decide whether to support a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war, with local officials reporting more than 18,000 Palestinians now killed in that conflict. The resolution has a lot of international support, but not where it counts, on the UN Security Council. The CBC's Abby Kugadasan reports.
The world's conscience is dead, says this elderly Palestinian man standing in the rubble of his destroyed home in Han Yunis. Thousands of kilometers away, the world will gather at the United Nations General Assembly and vote on a non-binding resolution calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. This vote comes after a similar vote failed last week at the UN Security Council. 13 of 15 members voted in favor, but the U.S. blocked that draft resolution with its veto. The U.K. abstained. Former British diplomat Tom Fletcher.
That Gaza is becoming a slaughterhouse. So I think it's time that the UK gets off the fence.
Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly hasn't said how Canada will vote today.
We are still looking at the different versions of the resolution. We're negotiating. There are different amendments that are being discussed.
She herself has stopped short of calling for a complete ceasefire, but she says the violence in Gaza must end.
We need to make sure that the way that Israel is conducting itself is in line with international humanitarian laws. Eventually, of course, we will support any form of accountability system at the international level that will look into this issue.
On Monday, Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant rejected the possibility of ending the military offensive in Gaza. He said the IDF's operation to defeat Hamas will take time. Abby Kwadas in CBC News, Berlin.
It's a crucial time for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. He's in Washington today trying to convince lawmakers to keep the financial aid flowing for his country's war efforts against Russia. But as freelance journalist Steve Futterman reports, Zelensky's chances of getting more money are starting to look bleak.
Across Washington today, Volodymyr Zelensky will be asking U.S. lawmakers for billions of dollars in aid.
The whole world is watching us.
Money that he says is absolutely necessary to continue fighting Russian forces.
Ukrainians haven't given up and won't give up.
Zelensky spoke yesterday at Washington's National Defense University. Today he will be making the rounds on Capitol Hill and at the White House. Biden administration officials are telling reluctant Republicans that military aid is a key to Ukraine's survival. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan.
We're running out of money, and we are nearly out of time. Any member of Congress who does not support funding for Ukraine is voting for an outcome that will make it easier for Putin to prevail.
But Republicans are insisting that any money for Ukraine must also include money for security at the U.S.-Mexico border. Last week, a bill that only included money for Ukraine was defeated, bringing an angry response from Joe Biden.
History's going to judge harshly those who turn their back on freedom's cause. We can't let Putin win.
Former U.S. Ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul.
Ukraine is running out of ammunition. They already are running out of missiles for their air defense systems.
This will be a critical day for Zelensky, asking for continued support from Washington as the Russian invasion stretches into yet another winter. Steve Futterman for CBC News, Los Angeles.
Jailed Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny is still missing somewhere within Russia's prison system. And today he failed to appear for a court hearing by video link. Prison officials are blaming an electrical problem, but Navalny's daughter, Dasha Nalovaya, told CNN she doesn't believe that.
Whenever my dad has a court hearing, he uses that to speak up against the war or tell people to question the regime. And Putin has actually just announced that he is going to be running for re-election, and they don't want my father to speak up against that.
A spokesperson for Navalny says he was supposed to be moved from the penal colony he's been held in since the middle of last year to a harsher special regime colony. But the process of moving prisoners by rail across Russia can take weeks, and their lawyers often don't have contact with them until they arrive at the destination. Russia's presidential election is set to be held in March. International negotiators are working past the deadline at the UN climate talks in Dubai. A deal is now overdue. The main sticking point is how and when to eventually wean the world off oil and gas. A preliminary agreement struck yesterday said countries could reduce use by 2050 rather than phasing it out. Critics are now singling out Saudi Arabia and a handful of other countries for resisting such an agreement. Alok Sharma is a British politician and a former COP president.
All of these countries need to understand what is at stake, and they need to remind themselves, because climate change does not recognize borders.
An updated agreement is still being discussed. The talks are officially supposed to finish today, but could stretch into tomorrow until a final deal is reached. Quote, heel-clicking obedience, just one colorful phrase used by a former Canadian senior executive with the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, as he alleges that China was directing the activities of the institution. A House of Commons committee last night heard from Bob Picard, who said he has little confidence the bank can change as long as China remains on its current geopolitical course. The committee is in the midst of reviewing the bank after Canada suspended its involvement with it. Murray Brewster has more.
It is dominated by senior Communist Party members.
Speaking to a House of Commons committee, Bob Picard gave members of Parliament a highly detailed account of the way he saw things unfold inside the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank.
This heel-clicking obedience is the way I would describe it at the President's office.
His allegations of kowtowing to the Chinese Communist Party were first made upon his resignation last June. The bank, set up in 2016 as a rival to the Washington-based World Bank, described his claims as a despicable pack of lies. Canada is one of the participants in the Infrastructure Bank, along with 105 other countries, and is now reviewing its involvement. Picard is skeptical the rift can be mended.
I would say that so long as we have the current geopolitical situation, and so long as we have the Chinese Communist Party trying to work to undermine Western democracies, it is impossible for that to happen.
Picard delivered no documents or evidence to back up his claims. He has, however, been working with Canadian officials who are trying to corroborate his story. Stephen Kuhn is with the Finance Department.
We have, in our work to date, have identified some weaknesses and some areas for further engagement with respect to the governance of the institution.
Last week, Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland expanded Canada's review of the infrastructure bank and suspended participation indefinitely. Murray Brewster, CBC News, Ottawa.
Police in Mississauga, Ontario, will later this morning give an update on their investigation into Kenneth Law. He was accused of selling deadly substances online to people who later took their own lives. The accused poison seller was charged yesterday with murder in connection with multiple deaths across Ontario, but police say he shipped such items to people in more than 40 countries. Ottawa is proposing new legislation to create drinking water standards in First Nations. Right now, there are no national regulations for drinking or wastewater on reserve. Olivia Stefanovic reports.
We've been under a boil water advisory for 28 years. Over 10,500 days.
Every new day extends Niskandiga's boil water advisory, the longest of any First Nation in the country. Chief Chris Muniez says he hopes Ottawa's new bill will prevent a repeat of what's happening to his home in a remote part of northwestern Ontario.
Once there's a boil water advisory, it will get addressed right away, as opposed to waiting 28 years.
Bill C-61 aims to create minimum national standards for drinking water and wastewater in First Nations.
What we have is more than a start.
Erica Bowden is the chief of Cowessess First Nation in Saskatchewan.
Indigenous people, Indigenous children deserve to be conceived, born, and die drinking clean water.
For too long, Indigenous Services Minister Patty Haidu says First Nations lagged far behind municipal water systems.
We've changed that under our government, but this bill would put that into law.
The proposed law also aims to replace legislation introduced by the previous Conservative government, repealed after it faced widespread criticism from First Nations over a lack of consultation and funding. Olivia Stefanovic, CBC News, Ottawa.
And that is the latest national and international news from World Report. Remember, if you ever miss World Report, you can hear it anywhere, anytime on the CBC Listen app or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm John Northcott. This is CBC News.
Good morning, Manitoba. You're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM in Winnipeg. I'm Emily Brass, filling in this week for Marcy Markusa. Here's what's coming up on the show. The Forks Winter Trail is on thin ice, literally. We'll check in about when folks can expect to start skating at the Forks amidst unseasonably high temperatures. We'll also have a chat with National Post parliamentary reporter Ryan Tumulty, who'll join us to talk about what he's watching this week in Ottawa as MPs prepare to return home for the holidays. And down to the wire, climate negotiators are trying to hammer out an agreement at the COP28 meeting in Dubai. Warren Mabey of Queen's University will help catch us up. All that and more on Information Radio. Time now is 6:11, and that means news headlines with Heather Wells.
Good morning. Well, a Point Douglas woman says she is heartbroken after two people were found dead in a tent. Winnipeg fire paramedics were called to the tent at Joe Zukin Park on Euclid Avenue yesterday afternoon. Catherine Flynn at the Point Douglas Residents Committee wants to see more forward thinking when it comes to helping homeless people in her neighborhood. And businesses in Thompson are grappling with a staffing shortage. Even the municipal government has a vacancy rate of more than 10%. And the Best Western Hotel in Thompson has been so short-staffed at one point, the general manager was cleaning hotel rooms. We'll hear more about that and other news from Manitoba coming up at 6:30.
Thanks, Heather.
You're welcome.
That's Heather Wells from the CBC News Desk. And joining us now is Abby Adeyemi in the studio with a look at weather and traffic.
Good morning, Em. Great to be with you here. Current conditions in the city. At the Forks, we're currently at minus 10 degrees. And as you step out today, just get ready for a day of changing skies. However, prepare for a shift of winds from northwest to at 20 kilometers an hour this morning as it progresses. And today it's going to be feeling like we're going to be getting that feel like minus 23 later today, but definitely I'll let you into all of those later on. And for traffic, don't forget our traffic line is 788-3093.
Coming up on 13 minutes after 6 o'clock, and you're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1. I'm Emily Brass. The United Nations Climate Change Conference in Dubai is wrapping up with a struggle over the final agreement and whether or not it'll include a pledge to end the use of fossil fuels. Should such an agreement be reached, it would be a landmark moment in the history of these climate conferences. For more, we're joined by Warren Mabey, Director of Queen's University's Institute for Energy and Environmental Policy. Hi, Warren.
Hello.
So we've been hearing on World Report that fossil fuels commitment not coming through. So what's your understanding of where things stand currently in terms of the negotiations on that final agreement?
Well, we're past the deadline that had been set by the hosts. So we're into overtime, if you like. I believe we're on the fifth draft of language around this. But as you said, it's been extremely contentious. The issue is that we're not seeing the kind of drawdown on fossil fuels or exclusion of fossil fuels that many nations are hoping to see in this draft. The language is much softer. It gives countries a lot more wiggle room around the use of fossil fuels and what to do with the emissions. This has been an incredibly difficult negotiation.
You mentioned the language being softer. I mean, where are we on the wording of the final communique?
So it's words like could instead of must. You know, countries could look at using abatement methods like carbon capture. They could look at implementing more renewable energy. They could do a number of things in order to bring their emissions down. All of which is good, you know, these are all good things, but it stops short at saying we will start to phase out fossil fuels. It stops short of saying we're not going to develop any new fossil fuels. And that's where a lot of the activists and where many countries are now looking for action.
And so to what extent does that wording matter?
Well, it matters because these international agreements actually give countries a lot of leverage in developing their own domestic policy. So a country like Canada, for instance, it's easier for us to go and develop a policy that is in concert with our partners around the world than to develop something on our own. It's easier to be able to say that we've made an international agreement and now we must move forward than it is to act independently. And without some kind of an agreement and without language in that agreement that can allow countries to act in a really decisive fashion, there's a chance that, you know, things will continue to simply go along as they've been going along, which of course is not going to get us to where we need to get to.
And what is Canada's position?
Well, Canada's position on this is not so hardlined as to talk about phasing out fossil fuels. And in this, we're behind some of our European partners, and I think we're behind the U.S. You know, the U.S. hasn't committed to fully phasing out fossil fuels, but they've used the word largely. Now, interpret that as you will. Largely phasing out fossil fuels. Canada won't go that far yet. We've talked about abating our emissions by, you know, introducing carbon capture technologies, by finding efficiencies. I think we're doing some very good things around methane emissions and, embracing things like cap and trade, but we're not at the point that we're ready to call for elimination of fossil fuels. And so that puts us, outside of some camps at this meeting.
And what about the oil-producing countries in the Gulf, like Saudi Arabia? We're hearing, they're playing a role in how this agreement is playing out. Tell us about the scene and conversations from these countries.
Well, certainly they're on the other side of this conversation. They see any ruling or language that eliminates or cuts down on fossil fuel use as a direct attack on their economies. This is their bread and butter and, the source of their wealth. And so, of course, they are pushing back. There's been a lot of attention given to the fact that this is a meeting, in Dubai, kind of in the heart of oil-producing nations. I'm not so sure that has changed the dialogue or changed the discussion here, but certainly the perception is that, these are nations that don't want that language to go forward and that are actively opposing it. And of course, at these meetings, opposition always leads to some kind of compromise and watering down of language.
And then what about the power brokers like China and the United States? What are their positions?
So the U.S. is more in favor of some stronger language about bringing down fossil fuel use. China is more in that abatement camp. But the two of them have actually been kind of working behind the scenes on compromise language. And it really helps that the two lead negotiators from those countries, Xi Zhenzu from China and then John Kerry from the U.S., these are very seasoned negotiators. They understand how to work these meetings, and they're actually helping with that, creating that compromise language.
Warren, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about this.
Thank you for having me.
Warren Mabey is director of Queen's University's Institute for Energy and Environmental Policy. He joined us today from Kingston.
What happened that made you start to think and see climate change differently?
It's wind and heat, fossil fuels, fire, floods. It's international and very Canadian.
Hi. How much snow have you got there?
Quite a bit. Laura Lynch guides you through the climate change crisis, the problems, and the solutions. What on Earth? Sunday morning at 11:30 in Newfoundland, and on the CBC Listen app.
Good morning. It's just about 6:20 right now. You're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM in Winnipeg. I'm Emily Brass, filling in this week for Marcy Markusa. Well, Christmas is right around the corner, but it might not feel like it just yet. The milder weather we've been having means we'll wait a little bit longer before hitting the skating trails at the Forks. The unseasonably mild weather lately also means it's not cold enough to get the skating rink under the canopy ready either. Larissa Pack is spokesperson for the Forks. She spoke with Up to Speed host Faith Fundal yesterday.
It is a little bit milder, but we're not worried yet. We're not too concerned just yet because John, I heard, just talking about a cold front, talking about flurries, these are music to our ears here at the Forks.
So whenever you hear John and other folks talk about the ideal temperatures, or at least closer to what we have now, you must smile.
Yeah, we are.
For folks who don't know, I mean, how cold does it have to be before the rink can be open? What conditions do you need to be able to do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple. It is, we have a few good days of below zero temperatures, preferably also a few nights of, below freezing, and we can put a rink in. So this week, for example, we're kind of looking at those a couple of days later in the week that it might be hovering above zero. It doesn't seem like a great time to start flooding. But as soon as we're looking at a few consecutive days of below zero temperatures, we are ready to go.
You don't necessarily need days of minus 20, for example. You just
certainly not.
Below zero.
Not for the on-land trails, not for the on-land skating rink under the canopy there. We would caution anyone against, jumping onto the river trail just because the temperature says minus 20. Right. That's something that we are, very vigilant about testing and not opening until it's absolutely safe. But no, for the on-land trails, we're slipping on icy patches just after a couple days of precipitation over the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't take a whole lot.
Contextualize this for us. When does the river trail usually open for folks who aren't keeping tabs of the dates?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen, there's a range, but on average, I would say hovering around the early to mid-January is what it has been in the past.
And the difference between the on-land skating rink and the river trail, you actually need consistent cold weather. What kind of weather conditions do you need for that trail to be safe enough for people to skate on?
Yeah, I mean, we need those consistent cold temperatures during the day and overnight, so that it's not, getting a little bit mushy by the end of the day and then not having a good freeze again overnight. So we're looking for, as cold as possible. That's what we love around here. And what makes things easier for us is if we have a cold snap, then we get a nice clean freeze. And, as little snow as possible all at once. The pristine, what we're always crossing our fingers for is like a deep freeze, really quick, get us a nice smooth river, not a lot of snow, not a lot of plowing to do down there, and then, good to go. But we, Mother Nature is steering the ship, and we are ready to respond as soon as she gives us the green light. Yeah.
The river levels, does that have an impact on when the trail might be opened? What do the levels look like?
It could potentially impact it, certainly if it fluctuates but while freezing, but that's not something that we are concerned about at this moment.
For folks who can't wait, they're chomping on the bit. What would you suggest to folks who could do different things in case they really can't wait?
Yeah, I mean, it is a little bit milder out right now. So and for anyone who's, put off by the deep freeze temperatures, I think it's a great time to come and check out the site while it's still pretty mild. We are getting all of our winter lighting up around the 52 acres that we have here at the Forks, which is really beautiful. And I think sometimes when the river trail is open, you want to head down there immediately. But there's stuff to see up on the on-land walking trails at this point, and there's lots of holiday shopping to be done in the market as well. So yeah, I mean, taking advantage of it while it's here, because I think winter is coming.
I ask this question to John all the time. Doesn't matter what the weather is, whether it's good or bad. Someone will always complain about it. How do you manage that?
How do we manage complaints about warm weather?
Mm-hmm.
I think exactly like what I just said. I think there's always activities. There's always something interesting to see or do around here at the Forks, whether it's inside or outside. And I mean, the other thing I do like to say to people is, we live in a winter city, and there's so much to embrace about the cold. And if you can get bundled up and layer up and get out there, we are here in Winnipeg, and there's lots of people making a real effort to making our city a very fun and enjoyable winter city.
That was Larissa Pack, Director of Corporate Communications at the Forks here in Winnipeg.
It's the most wonderful time of the year, with the kids jingle belling and everyone telling you be of good cheer. It's
Music group from Prince Edward Island, the East Pointers, with the popular holiday tune, It's the Most Wonderful Time of the Year.
Everybody knows a turkey and some mistletoe help to make the season bright. But singing along to Yuletide classics and new holiday favorites is what really makes the holly jolly. CBC Music unwraps the gift of holiday playlists to get you into the festive spirit. From pop to jazz, gospel, folk, blues, classical, country, and so many more. Now available on the CBC Listen app.
Good morning. It's 28 minutes after 6 o'clock, almost 6:29. So we're coming up on local news time. You're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 189.3 FM in Winnipeg. I'm Emily Brass in this week for Marcy Markusa. Well, still to come on the show, homeless shelters in Winnipeg are seeing a spike in the number of newcomers needing a place to stay. We'll hear what some local organizations are doing to help these newcomers connect with resources during these first difficult months before they qualify for government services. And after 13 years as executive director of the Royal MTC, Camilla Holland is moving on. And also, we'll speak with National Post parliamentary reporter Ryan Tumulty, who will join us to talk about what he's watching this week in radio. All that and more still to come. A quick look at the forecast. A mix of sun and clouds today, high -7. And tonight, mainly clear with a low of -11. Tomorrow, sunny and mild with a high of +3. It is time now for the CBC Local News with Heather Wells.
This is CBC News. Good morning. I'm Heather Wells. In Winnipeg at 6:30, it is -10. A woman in Point Douglas wants to see more forward thinking when it comes to helping homeless people in her neighborhood. 2 people were found dead in a tent at Joe Zukin Park. Fire paramedics were called to the park yesterday afternoon about a report of 2 people in cardiac arrest. Both were pronounced dead at the scene. Catherine Flynn is president of the Point Douglas Residents Association. She says the city and homeless outreach agencies need to do more.
The real piecemeal approach. Like some organizations handle St. Boniface and some organizations handle downtown. And it looks to me from where I sit that nobody handles Point Douglas.
Manitoba's Office of the Medical Examiner is investigating the cause of death. Cancelled home care visits and time restraints have prompted a St. Andrews woman to hire her own home care workers. Joanne Brown coordinates her mom's care under Manitoba's Self and Family Managed Care Program. Home care traditionally is provided through the province's regional health authorities, but Brown started managing her mom's care because she could no longer rely on the local health authority.
It's because of how much staff they have to do what they have to do. Staff was only allotted 20 minutes for both my parents to get them up, change their catheter bags, get them dressed, get them ready to go.
The Interlake Eastern Regional Health Authority says it is currently dealing with staffing vacancies in Selkirk. The health region is seeing an increase in people who manage their own care, but it could not link that to staffing in the region. The head of the Manitoba Dental Association has questions about how the new federal dental plan will be rolled out. That plan will cover routine dental procedures for low and middle income Canadians who don't have private insurance. It will begin with eligible seniors as early as next spring. Board President Dr. Scott Leckie worries it could create problems for dental offices.
I had several phone calls today of seniors wanting to access this plan, and I think it's fabulous. But I can't land on the shoulders of dentists to register the patient. I think the patients are going to be instructed to contact the government, and that's how they're going to register. And things like that could be very problematic for a dental office to try and negotiate.
It is not yet clear how dentists will sign up for the plan, how much they'll be compensated, or if there will be enough of them to meet the demand. In Thompson, businesses are grappling with a staffing shortage. Even the municipal government has a vacancy rate of more than 10%. Thompson City Manager Anthony McGuinness says they're doing what they can to make sure small and medium-sized businesses have enough workers. McGuinness says there is a push to build Indigenous partnerships and to rely more on immigration. He says the City of Thompson is also talking with the Chamber of Commerce and other organizations to see what sectors are feeling the staff shortage charge the most.
We hear anecdotally a lot when our meetings with the chamber as well. We hear what the needs are, but we really have to put that together and then do some targeting recruiting for that, whether it's in Canada or whether it's on immigrants to Canada.
The city of Thompson is hoping to launch a northern immigration program to help get skilled trades jobs filled. To Mississauga, Ontario now, where police later this morning give an update on their investigation into Kenneth Law. He is accused of selling deadly substances online to people who later took their own lives. The accused poison seller was charged yesterday with murder in connection with multiple deaths across Ontario, but police say Law shipped such items to people in more than 40 countries as well. You can hear more national and international news coming up on World Report at 7. The head of Canada's spy agency was in Winnipeg yesterday talking about threats to this country. CSIS Director David Vigneault delivered a keynote speech at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. He says the human toll of foreign interference is tangible and affects Canadians directly.
It can erode people's ability to express opinions and speak up without fear of retribution. Sometimes it can damage the well-earned livelihoods and finances of Canadians and their families. Other times, it can put individuals in harm's way.
Vigneault says some of Canada's adversaries have no limits on what they'll attempt to do. He calls the People's Republic of China, quote, the leading actor in using tactics to infiltrate and repress. You can find more on all these stories on our website this morning. Just head to cbc.ca/Manitoba.
Thank you very much, Heather.
You're welcome.
That's Heather Wells from the CBC Newsroom. You're listening to Information Radio. I'm Emily Brass, filling in this week for Marcy Markusa, and by my side here in the studio right now is Pat Kanuga joining us with a look at weather and traffic.
Oh, hi.
Hello.
Well, it is minus 10 outside in the city right now in the downtown at the Forks. So it's one of the colder overnights we're going to have for the next week or so. So tonight and tomorrow night, a little bit chilly. We will be a minus 7 today, one of the colder nights of the week, or colder days of the week, I should say. And then we get warm again. So we will see a mix of sun and clouds. I'm looking at satellite imagery right now. We have some clouds over Brandon and down towards the U.S. border. Winnipeg's pretty clear right now. And over the eastern border, Manitoba and Ontario, it's pretty cloudy as well. Dauphin and central Manitoba pretty clear right now. So today, mix of sun and clouds with that minus 7. Not much wind, southwest 10 to 20. It sure was rattling my windows overnight, Emily. It was so windy at around 1:30 it woke me up here in the Peg. And tonight we'll dip down to a minus 11. Tomorrow, or tonight I should say, we'll dip down to a minus 11. Yes, tomorrow mainly sunny, minus 2. Thursday a 3 at least, according to John Sauter. He's our meteorologist here at CBC Manitoba. Friday a plus 1. And again, the minus single digits just keep on giving into next week. Brandon, you're minus 14 right now. Increasing clouds this morning, and you'll see a minus 6 for your daytime high today. Tonight, we'll have clear and cold conditions. So it's the coldest overnight low this week, minus 18. And then compare that with tomorrow night where it's going to be minus 3. But tomorrow during the day, there's going to be a high of 0 for Brandon. So a warm one tomorrow, a sloppy day for Brandon tomorrow with that 0. And Thompson, you're minus 16, light snow at this hour. Temperature falls to minus 19 this morning, and then it rises. Tonight we'll dip down to a minus 26. Tomorrow, cloudy and a high of minus 6. So here's some of these single-digit minus temperatures again, Emily. Let's see here. We have minus 11s in Gimli and Morden-Winkler. We'll see a minus 7 in Gimli, a minus 6 in that Morden-Winkler Pembina Valley area. Melitta's minus 14 right now on the way to a minus 6. Whiteshell minus 10 on the way to a coolish minus 8. And Dauphin Parkland region minus 13. You're going to warm up to a minus 6. Pilot Mount Crystal City, good morning to you. Minus 14 on the way to a minus 6. And here, once again, in the city of Winnipeg, clear skies at 6:37 in the morning and a minus 10. Cold spot this morning. Good morning, Lynn Lake, minus 18.6. And the warm spot, minus 8.5 in Sprague in the southeast corner. In traffic, it's a quiet one so far. Side streets still might be a little icy, given the minus 10 that we're at right now and the snow that we got over the weekend. But 788-3093 is the traffic and commuter line to give me a call and let me know what's happening out there on the streets of Winnipeg or the highways of Manitoba.
Thank you, Pat.
Thank you.
That's CBC's Pat Kanuga, who's also our show director. It is 6:37. You're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM in Winnipeg and worldwide on our CBC Manitoba YouTube page and also on the CBC Listen app. Well, it's time now for a look at the business news. Crystalie Ramlakan is here with the CBC Business Report. Hi, Crystalie.
Good morning, Emily.
So, a council of prominent Indigenous leaders tasked with advising the Canadian National Railway has resigned. What's behind that move?
Yes, well, they say the company has failed to acknowledge past wrongs and follow its recommendations for reconciliation. So the resignations of all 12 members of the CN Indigenous Advisory Council take effect December 31st. And the council says in order to have a better relationship with Indigenous peoples, the company must accept its past, take action, and commit to change. Now, the council produced a report with recommendations, but says it became clear that CN had no intention of acknowledging and accepting its role in the historical and ongoing impact on Indigenous people. Now, historians have said the building of Canada's railways often meant land dispossession and starvation for Indigenous people. Now, Council co-chair, the Honourable Murray St. Clair, is a former senator and was the head of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And he says the council tried to foster understanding, connections, and transparency in outlining steps for the railway's reconciliation efforts. But he says the council, but he says that the 104-year-old company really missed the mark on reconciliation.
The TRC report talks in detail about some of the actions of rail companies historically. I think it's no secret that CN was a beneficiary of those actions. Well, in his book, Pierre Burton talks about the rail line generally as being a means by which the government of Canada essentially took action to occupy Indigenous territory, Indigenous lands.
Now, yesterday, CN put out a formal acknowledgement of the historical role railways played in as instruments of colonial policies and noted the social, cultural, and economic toll they have taken on generations of Indigenous communities. And CN says it has put together a team now to foster respectful relationships with Indigenous communities and to develop a reconciliation action plan. And it says it plans to release that plan next year and to have regular updates on its performance versus its goals.
Meanwhile, a number of changes are also happening at BlackBerry. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's right. So it's named a new CEO. It's promoted Paul Giammatteo to chief executive. And it has also called off plans for an initial public offering for part of its business. So the Waterloo, Ontario-based tech company hasn't said why it's abandoning those plans, but it says it still wants to divide the company's cybersecurity business and other businesses. So that was a commitment from a strategic review earlier this year with the goal of rewarding shareholders. So it says management is still focused on moving quickly to complete this reorganization. Now, yesterday's announcement marks the latest development in a period of transition for this company that rose to fame, of course, as we know, with its smartphones, but has since gone all in on cybersecurity and vehicle products. So the company has been planning to carve BlackBerry into two business units, dividing its cybersecurity operations from its other offerings, which it had hoped to hold an initial public offering for. Now, Ross Healy has been following BlackBerry since it was, called Research in Motion, and he is the chairman of Strategic Analysis Corporation.
If you're going to do an IPO, raise a bunch of money to do something, then you must have something there with a lot of promise. Well, if they suddenly cancel it in this kind of a market, which is at least favorable to the thought, then it sounds very much to me that the potential product that they're seeking to finance just didn't cut it.
Now, Giammatteo takes over from John Chen, who spent a decade at the helm of BlackBerry, where he was tasked with taking the company from its telecommunications roots to a cybersecurity software firm.
And for your final story, it's about a business doing very well in France that you might not expect to succeed over there.
Yes, Krispy Kreme is taking over Paris.
What?
So so the U.S. donut chain opened its first location in France last week, and it took over the space from an acclaimed Michelin-starred chef, actually.
Oh, my goodness.
Yes, so apparently 500 people lined up outside, some even overnight, for one of those hot glazed donuts. And, it's just a latest sign that the country's culinary preferences are perhaps shifting away from what you think of as, more refined and European to a faster, cheaper food. So, in fact, American chains such as Popeyes, KFC, and Domino's actually make up nearly 30% of France's fast food sales.
Wow.
And so, yes, exactly. I also thought this was really surprising. France is the second biggest market for McDonald's.
Whoa.
Yes, French fries? I don't know. I'm not sure. But, it did make $6.5 billion in sales there last year, McDonald's. Now, over the next 3 months, Krispy Kreme plans to open a dozen more stores in France and is planning to expand into supermarkets.
Oh, mon Dieu. Yes. Shocking. So what's happening in the market so far this morning? Maybe not as shocking.
In Europe, markets are cautiously higher as global investors look ahead to this week's U.S. Federal Reserve policy meeting, which begins today. Germany is down. The UK and France are both up. In Asia, stocks are higher. Japan, Shanghai, and Hong Kong are all up. Oil is down 37 cents to $70.95 U.S. per barrel. Gold is up $9.30 to $2,003 U.S. per ounce. And the dollar is up 0.02 of a cent to 73.69 cents U.S.
Thank you, Crystalie.
All right, thanks, Emily.
That was Crystalie Ramlakan with the business news. Now, if we asked you to name a Christmas song, you likely would come up with about a dozen titles without even trying. Now, what about a Hanukkah song? Odds are the one penned by comedian Adam Sandler would be at or near the top of that list. CBC radio producer Julie Dupre has been bringing us the stories behind some newer holiday tunes that have earned the title of classics. This week, the Hanukkah song.
Tonight is the 7th night of Hanukkah, and here to sing a Hanukkah song is Adam Sandler.
That's comedian Norm Macdonald ushering in Adam Sandler for a Weekend Update segment on Saturday Night Live on December 3rd, 1994.
When I was a kid, this time of year always made me feel a little left out. So I wrote a brand new Hanukkah song for you Jewish kids to sing, and I hope you like it. Put on your yarmulke.
That song would quickly become a holiday standard, and not just in Hanukkah celebrating circles. It's regularly featured on festive playlists and gets mainstream radio airplay. But another comedian had been slated to sing it. Here's Adam Sandler explaining what happened to Access Hollywood in 2023.
When I wrote that week on Saturday Night Live, Roseanne Barr was the host, and they were talking about Roseanne singing it. And she was nice enough to say, no, I'll let Adam do that. That's he wrote it, that's his song.
Sandler actually shares writing credits on the song with SNL writers Louis Morton and Ian Maxtone Graham. The lyrics that pay tribute to famous Jewish people have been updated at least 3 times by Sandler himself to keep the song sounding current. There's the original.
David Lee Roth lights the menorah. So do James Conn, Kirk Douglas, and the late Dinah Shore.
Then part 2 from 1999.
Winona Ryder drinks Manischewitz wine, then spins a dreidel with Ralph Lauren and Calvin Klein.
Part 3 was featured in the 2002 film 8 Crazy Nights.
Osama bin Laden, not a big fan of the Jews. Well, maybe that's because he lost a figure skating match to gold medalist Sarah Hughes. Her mama's Jewish.
And part 4, recorded in 2015.
Gordon Levitt enjoys eating kugel. So does Stanley Jake Gyllenhaal and the 2 guys who founded Google. Adam Levine.
There's been some fact-checking done on those famous Jews over the years. Some have pointed out that while Paul Newman had a Jewish father, faith is matrilineal, so he doesn't actually qualify according to the rules of Jewish law. Harrison Ford, who Sandler describes as being a quarter Jew, reportedly looked at Sandler in a brief encounter and told him he's actually, quote, half.
This season, Columbia Pictures brings you Adam Sandler like you've never seen him before.
The Hanukkah song also inspired an animated film, 2002's 8 Crazy Nights, which definitely was not as big a hit as the song. It was widely panned by critics and described on the site Rotten Tomatoes as, quote, a total misfire that is not suitable for children and not entertaining to most adults. Ouch. But still Sandler, who, by the way, has gone on to make many more animated films that have been more well-received, is still quite fond of his novelty song for the festive season.
I'm happy to be a part of Hanukkah. If it comes on the radio and I hear it, I get excited. That's still awesome.
So let's keep that excitement going. For CBC Radio, I'm Julie Dupre.
Here comes Hanukkah, so much Hanukkah to celebrate Hanukkah. Hanukkah is the festival of lights. Instead of one day of presents, we have 8 crazy nights. When you feel like the only kid in town without a Christmas tree, here's a list of people who are Jewish, just like you and me. David Lee Roth lights the menorah. So do James Conn, Kirk Douglas, and the late Dinah Shore. Guess who eats together at the Carnegie Deli? Bowser from Sha-Na-Na and Arthur Fonzarelli. Paul Newman's half Jewish, Goldie Hawn's half too. Put them together, what a fine-looking Jew. Don't need deck the halls or jingle bell rock, 'cause you can spin a dreidel with Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock, both Jewish. Put on your yarmulke, it's time for Hanukkah.
That's Adam Sandler with the classic Hanukkah song. And next week, Julie Dupre will bring us the story of Santa Baby. It is now 10 minutes before 7 o'clock, and you're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM in Winnipeg, worldwide on our CBC Manitoba YouTube page, and on the CBC Listen app. I'm Emily Brass, filling in this week for Marcy Markusa. Well, the countdown's on before the House of Commons rises for the holiday break. By the end of this week, members of Parliament will start returning home to their ridings. Joining us now to look back on this past season and ahead towards the new year is Ryan Tumulty. He's a parliamentary reporter with the National Post. Hi, Ryan.
Hi there.
So what legislation is expected to pass the House this week before the fall session comes to a close?
Yeah, so, late last night, actually, one piece finally did pass. That was C-56, which is the government's bill that ends the GST on rental housing, also strengthens the Competition Act. It's supposed to lower prices. That's what the government at least hopes will happen. The other things I think that could pass this week, certainly there's the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement that's been subject to some debate in the House because the Conservatives have opposed it because it mentions a carbon tax. And the other thing that might, I think probably not, but might pass is the government's Sustainable Jobs Act, which is supposed to help energy workers transition into new careers as the sort of oil and gas sector winds down.
Mm-hmm. And of course, last Friday, we saw a marathon 24-hour nonstop voting session in the House. What impact will this have on the government getting their agenda through the House before they break for the holidays?
Yeah, I think it makes it less likely, to be frank. The Conservatives were quite clear that that was their goal. Their goal was to slow down the government's agenda. And, House time is a limited commodity. There's only so much of it in a given year. And certainly at this time of the year, it seems like there's less if you're the government. So, that chewed a full day that could have been used for voting or debating on other measures, getting other legislation passed. And so I think it does make it much more difficult for them to get what they want passed this week.
So what do you think will be a priority when the House resumes at the end of January?
I think one thing that will probably be top of the list is a piece of pharmacare legislation. That was supposed to be introduced this year, and I think it's pretty clear it won't be at this stage. And that is a part of the confidence and supply agreement with the NDP. So it's pretty crucial for the Liberals to get something in to the House on that. And then I think the Liberals will definitely want to pass anything that didn't get passed in this week ahead. Things like their anti-scab or anti-replacement worker legislation, I think they'll want to push that through. And then before you know it, we're at the spring budget. So I think it will be another busy session, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. And how would you describe the tenor of this last fall session in the House of Commons?
Yeah, I would say it's been heated. It has been partisan. It has been all of those things. Certainly, it's been a lot going on outside of the House, of course, right? We started September with the Prime Minister's accusations against the Indian government. Then we had Speaker Anthony Rota resign. Then we had the war between Israel and Hamas. So there has definitely been a lot going on. And I think that has been a challenge for the government to sort of focus on the agenda it wants to get to talk about. It really came in wanting to talk about affordability and housing and these top-of-mind issues for Canadians, but all these outside events have distracted it. And then just generally, there's been a lot of tension in question period and in committees and a lot of tense back and forth between the Liberals and the Conservatives especially.
And so how does that, tense atmosphere affect the business of governing and the job of getting things done in the House of Commons?
Yeah, I mean, it slows things down. The Conservatives have been, this 24-hour voting marathon was sort of their big club, but their overall goal has been to slow down and obstruct this government's agenda, and they have been consistent to that the whole way through. So, I think they've pushed pretty hard, and there are other procedural tools that they can use all the time to slow down the government's legislation. They are the opposition party, so on some level, this is their job, and they've been definitely doing it.
Interesting. Well, thanks so much for joining us this morning, Ryan.
All right, thank you.
Ryan Tumulty is a parliamentary reporter with the National Post. Just a few minutes coming up on World Report, and we're going to have a look at what else is coming up on the show. Imagine arriving in Winnipeg without money or contacts and ending up in a homeless shelter. A growing number of newcomers are finding themselves in that situation, and we're going to talk to one of the organizations that's stepping in to help. Also, the Royal Manitoba Theatre Centre is going to be looking for a new executive director next season. We'll speak with the outgoing one, Camilla Holland. That's at 7:35, and all that and more is still to come.
Everybody knows a turkey and some mistletoe help to make the season bright. But singing along to Yuletide classics and new holiday favorites is what really makes the holly jolly. CBC Music unwraps the gift of holiday playlists to get you into the festive spirit. From pop to jazz, gospel, folk, blues, classical, country, and so many more. Now available on the CBC Listen app.
4 minutes before 7 o'clock, you're listening to Information Radio. I'm Emily Brass, and joining us now from the newsroom is Heather Wells.
Good morning. Well, cancelled home care visits and time restraints have prompted one woman in St. Andrews to hire her own home care workers. Joanne Brown coordinates her mom's care under Manitoba's Self and Family Managed Care Program. It's traditionally something provided through the province's regional health authorities, but Brown started managing her mom's care because she could no longer rely on the local health authority. We'll hear what happened there. And the board president of the Manitoba Dental Association is excited about the federal government's new dental plan, but Dr. Scott Leckie also worries how it's going to roll out. He wishes the government had consulted dentists earlier. We'll hear from him in our next local news at 7:30.
Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
That's CBC's Heather Wells joining us from the newsroom. And joining us now in studio is our director of the show, Pat Kanuga. He's going to take a look at the traffic and weather.
Good morning, everyone. 788-3093 is the traffic and commuter line to give me a call. You know what I've been wondering, Emily, is we haven't really heard much about the extra traffic volumes on McPhillips, Salter, and Main because of the Arlington Bridge being closed for a few weeks now. If you're out and about and it's safe to do so, and you want to tell me what have you noticed as far as those traffic volumes, do let me know. 788-3093 once again is the traffic line. So right now, though, no reports of stalls, crashes, major incidents like that. Side streets still might be a little bit greasy from the weekend, from the snow we got Friday, and the different temperatures that we've been having. So please give me a call if you can, if there's anything to update us on.
Thank you, Pat.
Thank you.
And again, a quick look at what's coming up. Homeless shelters in Winnipeg are seeing a spike in the number of newcomers who need a place to stay. We're going to hear what some local organizations are doing to help these newcomers connect with resources. And it's especially tough in the first few months upon arrival because they don't qualify yet for government services. And also, the Royal Manitoba Theatre Centre is going to be looking for a new executive director next season. We're going to speak with the outgoing one, Camilla Holland. That's coming up after the local news in the next hour. And according to a new report, it's becoming harder for Manitobans making minimum wage to make ends meet. All that and more still to come on Information Radio.
Of water during what was very much a high-tech treasure hunt.
The San Jose galleon has sat at the bottom of the sea for 300 years, filled with gold and jewels that could be worth $20 billion. Colombia's government wants to retrieve the ship. Not everyone is on board. Coming up on The Current.
The Current with Matt Galloway. This morning at 8:37, 9:07 in Newfoundland. And on the CBC Listen app.
This is World Report. Good morning from CBC News. I'm John Northcott. Today, at the United Nations, a symbolic vote about the future of Gaza. The UN General Assembly will decide whether to support a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war, with local officials reporting more than 18,000 Palestinians now killed in that conflict. The resolution has a lot of international support, but not where it counts on the UN Security Council. The CBC's Abby Kugadasan reports.
The world's conscience is dead, says this elderly Palestinian man standing in the rubble of his destroyed home in Han Yunis. Thousands of kilometers away, the world will gather at the United Nations General Assembly and vote on a non-binding resolution calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. This vote comes after a similar vote failed last week at the UN Security Council. 13 of 15 members voted in favor, but the U.S. blocked that draft resolution with its veto. The U.K. abstained. Former British diplomat Tom Fletcher.
That Gaza is becoming a slaughterhouse. So I think it's time that the UK gets off the fence.
Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly hasn't said how Canada will vote today.
We are still looking at the different versions of the resolution. We're negotiating. There are different amendments that are being discussed.
She herself has stopped short of calling for a complete ceasefire, but she says the violence in Gaza must end.
We need to make sure that the way that Israel is conducting itself is in line with international humanitarian law. Eventually, of course, we will support any form of accountability system at the international level that will look into this issue.
On Monday, Israel's defense minister Yoav Gallant rejected the possibility of ending the military offensive in Gaza. He said the IDF's operation to defeat Hamas will take time. Abby Kouadas in CBC News, Berlin.
There's no deal yet at the UN Climate Summit in Dubai, and international negotiators are now working past the deadline. As Kyle Bax tells us, even as talks continue, hopes for an historic agreement are melting away.
We stayed up all night.
Long hours and little sleep as climate talks in Dubai are in overtime. So far, still not much progress. COP28 Director General Megad El-Swedi.
Now We need them to roll up their sleeves and give us the text we can all be proud of.
A main sticking point is how and when to eventually wean the world off oil and gas. A tentative preliminary agreement said countries could reduce use by 2050. The phrasing had many in a fury.
Oh, I'm not sure how coherent I'm going to be.
Joseph Sekulu was in tears. He's an activist representing island nations in the Pacific.
Unless we actually acknowledge that it's a phase out of fossil fuels that will save our planet, what is the point of us being here?
Critics are pointing the finger at Saudi Arabia and a handful of other countries for resisting any agreement on wiping out oil and gas by 2050.
This is the point of the negotiations where the rubber absolutely hits the road.
Alok Sharma is a British politician and a former COP president.
All of these countries need to understand what is at stake, and they need to remind themselves, because climate change does not recognize borders.
Federal Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault says some countries shouldn't show up to negotiations if they aren't willing to compromise.
We should be willing to engage on constructive discussions, which many of us have done, and I would invite all parties to do that.
An updated agreement is in the works. The talks are officially supposed to finish today, but could stretch into tomorrow as nations squabble over the final deal. Kyle Bax, CBC News, Dubai.
It's a crucial time for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. He's in Washington today trying to convince lawmakers to keep the financial aid flowing for his country's war efforts against Russia. But as freelance journalist Steve Futterman reports, Zelensky's chances of getting more money are starting to look bleak.
Across Washington today, Volodymyr Zelensky will be asking U.S. lawmakers for billions of dollars in aid.
The whole world is watching us.
Money that he says is absolutely necessary to continue fighting Russian forces.
Ukrainians haven't given up and won't give up.
Zelensky spoke yesterday at Washington's National Defense University. Today he will be making the rounds on Capitol Hill and at the White House. Biden administration officials are telling reluctant Republicans that military aid is a key to Ukraine's survival. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan.
We're running out of money, and we are nearly out of time. Any member of Congress who does not support funding for Ukraine is voting for an outcome that will make it easier for Putin to prevail.
But Republicans are insisting that any money for Ukraine must also include money for security at the U.S.-Mexico border. Last week, a bill that only included money for Ukraine was defeated, bringing an angry response from Joe Biden.
History's going to judge harshly those who turn their back on freedom's cause. We can't let Putin win.
Former U.S. Ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul.
Ukraine is running out of ammunition. They already are running out of missiles for their air defense systems.
This will be a critical day for Zelensky, asking for continued support from Washington as the Russian invasion stretches into yet another winter. Steve Futterman for CBC News, Los Angeles.
Alexei Navalny's daughter wants to know why her Russian dissident father didn't appear for a scheduled court appearance today.
The concerning thing is that we have no idea where he is or what's happening or if he's even being transferred anywhere.
Dasha Navalnaya told CNN the official word from prison officials, her father couldn't appear by video link because of technical problems. But she says she doesn't believe that.
I'm very concerned for him. The last time the attorneys have been able to speak to him was 6 days ago. And since then, he's been MIA. We have no idea where he is. And the technical problems are just a front.
Navalny is one of Russian President Vladimir Putin's harshest critics. He often uses his court appearances to speak out against the Kremlin, and his daughter says he's being silenced now because Putin is running for re-election in March. In Japan, a court has found 3 former soldiers guilty of sexually assaulting a female colleague. Now, the case had been dropped, but the victim came forward demanding a reinvestigation. Outside the courthouse, Rina Gonoy told reporters the guilty verdict shows the acts towards her were not a joke, but an actual crime. Gonoy says she hopes the defendants think about what they did and reflect deeply on their actions. The reinvestigation that Gonoy called for prompted a military-wide harassment probe. The convicted former soldiers won't actually serve time in prison, but advocates are still calling this a rare victory for survivors who dare to challenge taboos around abuse. Police in Mississauga, Ontario, will later this morning update the public on their investigation into Kenneth Law. The accused poison seller was charged yesterday with murder in connection with multiple deaths across Ontario. As Thomas Daigle reports, families are demanding justice not just in Canada, but around the world.
I told my mom right away. She was about ready to break into tears.
When Gerald Cohn in Chicago learned Kenneth Law was facing new charges of second-degree murder in Ontario, he says he considered it encouraging news, while he awaits similar action in the U.S.
I want something where I can say, we got justice for Benji.
His 34-year-old brother Benjamin died by suicide in February after placing an online order from Kenneth Law. Police allege the 58-year-old Toronto area man sold a toxic substance and other items for self-harm to vulnerable clients around the world. Law was already charged with counseling or aiding suicide in Ontario. Now investigators are set to explain what led them to add 14 charges of murder.
It's a mix of emotions for me.
David Parfitt's son, Tom, was 22 when his body was found next to a package linked to Law.
We had all the evidence that we needed 2 years ago. And yet, unfortunately, in those 2 years, more people died.
Police in Calgary, Saskatoon, and other Canadian cities are reviewing sudden deaths for possible connections to Law. 21-year-old Stephen Mitchell Jr. from Toronto died in March. His father told us he's pleased with the murder charges because, in his words, they better reflect the nature of the crime. Thomas Daigle, CBC News, Toronto.
And finally, the publisher of Sports Illustrated has fired the magazine's CEO. The Arena Group says Ross Levinson was let go to, quote, improve operational efficiency. It didn't mention the report that Sports Illustrated published articles written by fake authors. Everything reportedly generated by artificial intelligence, even bios like this one.
Sora has always been a fitness guru and loves to try different foods and drinks. Ms. Tanaka is thrilled to bring her fitness and nutritional expertise to the product reviews team and promises to bring you nothing but the best of the best.
According to the technology publication Futurism, the author, Sora Tanaka, doesn't exist. Her picture and her words created by AI. The Arena Group has denied those allegations. Well, that is the latest national and international news from World Report. I'm John Northcott. This is CBC News.
Good morning, Manitoba. You're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM in Winnipeg, worldwide on our CBC Manitoba YouTube channel. Good morning. I'm Emily Brass, filling in this week for Marcy Markusa. Here's what's coming up on this hour of the show. After 13 years as executive director of the Royal Manitoba Theatre Company, Camilla Holland is moving on. We're going to have a chat with her after the local news. How much money do you need to survive? According to a new report, it's becoming harder for Manitobans who are making minimum wage to make ends meet. That'll be at $7.50. But first, imagine arriving in Winnipeg without money or contacts and ending up in a homeless shelter. Well, a growing number of newcomers are finding themselves in that situation. We're going to talk to one of the organizations stepping in to help. All that and more coming up on Information Radio. 11 minutes after 7 o'clock, time for news headlines with Heather Wells.
Good morning. A woman in Point Douglas wants to see more forward thinking when it comes to helping people who are homeless in her neighborhood. 2 people were found dead in a tent at Joe Zukin Park yesterday, both pronounced dead at the scene. We're going to hear from the head of the Point Douglas Residents Association coming up. And in Thompson, businesses are grappling with a staffing shortage. Even the municipal government has a vacancy rate of more than 10%. And the Best Western Hotel in the city of Thompson has been so short-staffed. At one point, the general manager was cleaning hotel rooms. We're going to hear more in our next local news at 7:30.
And I thought my job was tough.
Yeah, no kidding.
Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
That's Heather Wells from the CBC News Desk. And joining us now here in studio is CBC's Pat Kanuga with a look at the traffic. What's happening out there, Pat?
So no reports of major stalls or incidents here in the city of Winnipeg at 7:12 in the morning. Heard from commuter Keith. He said his highways 2 and 10 are just like yesterday. Icy patches and crusty sections. So as well, Highway 10 south of Brandon has some frosty patches. And he said the plows weren't out. So maybe that's because because of the sun, and maybe highway crews are hoping it would melt, but that is on Highway 2 and 10. Inside the city, Dan on a bike called. Good morning, Dan. He said, on a bike this morning, slippery on a bike. Not very good conditions on the active transport route in South Winnipeg. So know that if you are on a bike this morning. 788-3093 is the traffic and commuter line to reach me. Now look at the Winnipeg forecast. Here is Abby Adiemi.
Good morning, guys. Current temperatures of the Forks currently sit at minus 11 degrees. And as you step out today, get ready for a day of changing skies. You know, we're going to be seeing the mix of sun and cloud throughout the day. And I would advise you might want to grab those sunglasses as the sun is going to be peeking through the clouds later on. According to John Sauter's forecast, expect a day high that would reach around minus 7 degrees. However, you might want to brace for some chilly wind chills because it's going to be feeling like minus 23 later this morning. So you need to bundle up, and the wind chill is going to be expected to improve around minus 14 in the afternoon. Tonight, as the evening approaches, expect partial cloudy skies with the temperature dropping to a low of minus 18 degrees this evening. And a tip, because it's going to be a cold day, a friendly reminder with the cooler temperatures, ensure that our furry friends are cozy and warm too today. Emily, right? You need to keep them warm.
Yeah, no kidding. Like if it's cold for us, it's cold for them,
It's
like
cold,
they say, right?
It's cold for them, exactly.
14 minutes after 7 o'clock, and you're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1. I'm Emily Brass. Well, moving to a new country can be complicated and confusing. It can be even more challenging for people arriving as refugees without much money or access to resources. More and more newcomers are ending up in Winnipeg homeless shelters, and they often have different needs than shelter staff are used to. The Manitoba Association of Newcomer Supporting Organizations, or MANSO, is stepping in to help. And joining us now in studio is Cody Gunther. She's Executive Director of New Journey Housing, and that's one of the groups involved with MANSO. Good morning, Cody.
Good morning, Emily. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us in person. So let's start with the numbers. Like, how big of an increase are Winnipeg shelters seeing in terms of newcomers coming to the city and needing a place to stay?
Yeah, so looking at the number of refugee claimants, in the month of September, there were 65 claims made. In the month of October, we jumped to 135.
Whoa.
So it's a huge jump, and we're on track in the year 2023 to almost double what 2022 saw. So a big increase.
And is that like higher than we've been seeing in a while?
Yes, that is. October is the highly monthly number since 2017.
And that was a different era.
That was a very different era. That was when Trump got in the States, and a lot of people were trying to flee the States to come to Canada.
Okay, so tell us a bit about the newcomers you're meeting now at the shelter. Where are they coming from, and why do they end up staying in the shelters?
Mm-hmm. So when refugee claimants first arrive, they're here on a temporary status, and they're not eligible for a lot of services. So they can't get social assistance, they can't get into housing right away. So they're in need of a free place to stay, which is the shelter system. They're coming from various countries in Africa, Central America. We have a lot of Arabic speakers, French, Spanish. And then they have to stay at the shelter for at least a couple of months while all the paperwork and stuff gets figured out.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes Winnipeg's not even their first stop in Canada.
Yeah, that's correct. Some of them have arrived in Toronto, for example, but then the emergency shelter system there is even worse than here in Winnipeg. So people are on the streets there, and they found that, or they've heard that maybe Winnipegers a little bit easier. So then they're making their way to Winnipeg.
And how's the situation different for these newcomers as opposed to maybe people who've been coming from Ukraine?
Yeah, a big difference there is Ukrainians that arrive, they're being they get to stay in hotels for at least 30 days. And they also get their work permits right away. So they're able to start working really quickly. Refugee claimants, it can take months to get their work permits. So they're really stuck for that first 2 to 3 months with no income, not a lot to do. So that's the big difference between Ukrainian arrivals and these refugee claimants.
Mm-hmm. So how are New Journey and other groups that are part of MANSO stepping in to help?
Yeah, so the other tricky thing is that a lot of agencies can't support refugee claimants because of their temporary status. So we've pieced together different agencies that have creative funding in order to do this. So we go on site to Salvation Army 3 mornings a week. New Journey Housing, Canadian Muslim Women's Institute, Healthy Muslim Families, and Welcome Place. We're there on site. We're meeting with the folks that are staying there, giving them information, referrals, answering questions in real time. So we've been doing this for, I think, 3 weeks now, and it's been going really well.
Okay, so what are some of the biggest questions and greatest needs that you're hearing, through this refugee information hub that you've set up at the Center of Hope?
So a big one is winter is coming, and they have questions about where can I get winter clothes? How should I dress to stay warm? Those types of things. So we've had workshops on winter safety. Health access questions is really important because refugee claimants aren't eligible for Manitoba Health and other healthcare services. So trying to figure out what we can do there. Employment, their refugee claim process, all those types of questions.
And then how big a problem is a language barrier in this case?
Yeah, very big, but we are very lucky that at least our team at New Journey and the other settlement organizations have staff that speak multiple languages. So we have folks on site that can translate into Arabic and French, but obviously that's a barrier when they're trying to access, mainstream services. So we're doing our best to try to support them.
And so how does your organization, New Journey Housing, help out at the Info Hub?
Yeah, so we're the housing piece. So as soon as they're eligible for social assistance, EIA, or they find a job, then we can help them find housing because you can't get into any apartment, even subsidized housing, without an income. So our job is to meet with them, talk about budget, search for housing, talk to landlords, try to set up viewings, and then support them as they, start renting their first place in Canada.
And speaking of support that they might need, as refugees fleeing their countries, they're probably still processing some pretty difficult experiences, while they're also trying to adapt to life in Canada. What other kinds of support is being offered?
Yeah, so there's definitely support needed on the mental health piece. Canadian Muslim Women's Institute has some workshops on coping with change, which are really well attended by these refugee claimants. We're reaching out to find other mental health supports, folks dealing with trauma, post-traumatic stress, reaching out to Aurora Family Therapy to try to get some help that way, because that's a big concern.
Meanwhile, they're sharing these shelter spaces with people who are in different situations. What kind of response is there to newcomers, staying in shelters that are generally already jam-packed in Winnipeg?
Yeah, and that's why we started this. Some of the shelters were reaching out to us saying, hey, we're at capacity already. We're seeing this rise in refugee claimants. What can we do? So when there's a scarcity of resources, sometimes things get tense. And we want there to be space for everybody that needs it. So that's why we're trying to advocate to get more beds, more spaces, maybe even a new shelter space for refugee claimants. But it's a matter of educating folks and being like, we're welcoming them here. This is the newest community in Winnipeg, and we want to make sure that people understand each other and work hard to kind of get to know where everyone's at.
And how are your groups supporting the staff that work in the shelter?
Yeah, so we had our friends at Healthy Muslim Families created a training that we're going to be giving to shelter staff to teach them, what is a refugee claimant? Where are they coming from? What processes do they have to go through? And different things that might be unique to their situation so that we can properly train the shelter staff who might have never worked with refugee claimants before.
And are you going to be keeping this up all winter?
That's the plan.
Okay, great. And so I'm sure there's a lot of people listening out there who would like to help support newcomers who are staying in shelters. What can they do?
Yeah, so right now we're in need of some donations. Canadian Muslim Women's Institute, they are the ones accepting donations. We're talking stuff for new households. So kitchen supplies, bedding, blankets, pillows, winter clothing is really big. So CMWI, that's the agency's name. They're located at 61 Juno Street. They will accept donations. Their phone number is 204-943-8539. And that's CMWI if you want to Google them as well.
Thanks so much for coming in, Cody.
Thank you, Emily.
Cody Gunther is Executive Director at New Journey Housing, and that's one of the groups supporting the new Refugee Information Hub at Salvation Army's Center of Hope in Winnipeg.
Frequencies with Errol Nazareth. The world is alive with sound, whether across the street or across the pond, from back home or in your own backyard. Every place has a sound and every person has a story. Discover songs and stories from people and communities across Canada and around the world. Frequencies with host Errol Nazareth. Episodes available on demand on the CBC Listen app.
the Brother Bicker Band from Calgary with Another Kind of Train, and that's another kind of Christmas song. Their new album of the same name is out now. 25 minutes after 7 o'clock, minus 11 at the Forks in Winnipeg, and you're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM in Winnipeg. I'm Emily Brass, in for Marcy Markusa. Well, it's time now for a look at sports. Scott Regehr joins us with the CBC Sports Report. Hi, Scott.
Hey there, Emily.
So the Northern Star Award for Canada's Athlete of the Year, it will be given out Monday. And what are your thoughts on who won it in the end? We did touch on who might yesterday.
I thought it might be Nick Taylor, the Winnipeg-born golfer who claimed the Canadian Open, first man to do that from this country in 69 years. But alas, it was not. It was another very worthy recipient, basketball star Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. The Hamilton native has had an incredible 2023, Emily. He finished in the top 5 in most valuable player balloting in the NBA. And then rather than taking the summer off, he went and used it to help guide Canada to the Olympics for the first time in 23 years. Arash Murdani was one of the media who voted for Gilgeous-Alexander yesterday, Emily, and he spoke to CBC Newsnet about it.
All of this speaks to something that I think has been a trend now for a number of years, and it's amazing to see that we're not just a 1 or 2 sport country anymore. Our athletes across the board are dominating in their fields globally. And one of the great privileges of voting and being part of this committee is I always tell people there's never a wrong answer. We are discussing among the great Canadian athletes who are dominating across the board on the world stage. That's pretty cool to see.
If Gilgeous-Alexander, Emily, played for the Lakers or the Knicks, his face would be everywhere. Instead, he suits up for one of the NBA's less glamorous markets, the Oklahoma City Thunder. That does not seem to bother him, though. Last night, he had another 30-point effort, and there was another win for the Thunder, who are right near the top of the league. Raptors fans who are wondering what if. He's a free agent in 2027, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander.
Oh, meanwhile, go Oklahoma.
Yeah, that's right.
They could
go Thunder.
Yeah, exactly. So now to a story you were telling us about yesterday, the federal government taking measures towards creating safe sport. What's going on there?
Yeah, Ottawa, Emily, is launching a 3-person commission in the new year that will investigate systemic abuse and human rights violations in Canadian sports. The government has been under pressure for months from athletes, advocates, and a parliamentary committee to call a public inquiry into what they call a pattern of normalizing abuse. Sports Minister Carla Qualtrough says a public inquiry is not what's needed.
We are not starting from scratch here. We do not need to revisit the issue of whether there's a safe sport crisis in this country. That's the starting point for this. We do not want cross-examination of victims. We do not want people to have to prove they were traumatized. And quite frankly, the TRC model is a much safer approach in that context.
The commission will begin its 18-month investigation early next year.
And now to baseball with some creative financing by the LA Dodgers.
What would Pink Floyd say, Emily, about the contract Shohei Ohtani just signed? The $700 million deal with the Dodgers, the richest in pro sports history, but also one of the most unusually structured. Ohtani, it's being reported, has received or will receive just $2 million in salary a year for the length of this deal. When it's done a decade from now, he'll get the rest in deferred payments. Ohtani's even agreed not to charge the Dodgers interest. So why would he do this? Well, so that his new team can afford to sign other stars while Ohtani's with the Dodgers. LA would love, for instance, to acquire the best pitcher in the world, not yet in the majors. That's Ohtani's countryman Yoshinobu Yamamoto. And so the rich will get richer, unless you're talking about the state of California, which will not be getting the tax revenue from the bulk of that $700 million. Ohtani will probably be living back home in Japan, so it'll be the Japanese government getting that tax revenue. And just before I head off, and while I'm referencing California, Jets in San Jose tonight against the Sharks, going for a 5th straight win, Winnipeg. Will they have Kyle Connor back in the lineup after that knee-on-knee injury? We don't know yet, but it's something to monitor.
Fingers crossed. Go Jets.
You bet.
Thank you, Scott. That's Scott Regehr with the CBC Sports Report. The CBC News is next.
This is CBC News. Good morning. I'm Heather Wells in Winnipeg. At 7:30 it is -11 right now in downtown Winnipeg. A mix of sun and clouds today. A high of -7, likely the coolest day of the week. The warm-up begins again tomorrow. A Point Douglas woman says she is heartbroken after 2 people were found dead in a tent. Winnipeg fire paramedics were called to the tent at Joe Zukin Park on Euclid Avenue yesterday afternoon. They found 2 people who were pronounced dead at the scene. Catherine Flynn is the chair of the Point Douglas Residents Committee.
There's been a lot of talk about, people have a right to live on the land in tents and they have a right to inhabit bus shelters. I would like to see a concerted effort to find people decent places to live, because often they're not in decent places, and that's why they're living in tents.
Manitoba's Office of the Medical Examiner is working to determine the cause of death of the 2 people. One health region is seeing more people manage their own home care. The Interlake Eastern Regional Health Authority says it offers more flexibility to some families. The area has a 17% vacancy rate for healthcare aides. Traditionally, they have provided the majority of home care for the region. When she could no longer rely on them, Joanne Brown hired her own home care attendants for her parents who live in Selkirk.
It was a nightmare, it really was. And the canceled visits all the time. They both have catheters. I'd have to drive through snowstorms to get there to look after them because home care wasn't showing up. So once I had private, it was much better.
Brown doesn't blame the workers. She sees it as a system-wide issue because of staffing shortages. The Manitoba government says about 1,500 clients across the province were registered for self- and family-managed care as of October 1st. The Best Western Hotel in Thompson has been so short-staffed, at one point the general manager was cleaning the rooms. That person is Ethel Timbang. She is also president of the Thompson Chamber of Commerce. Timbang says staff shortages are a way of life for businesses in the northern city. Some are turning to temporary foreign workers to fill the gaps.
That's the start for economic development, because if you are an investor and if you want to put up a company here, you need people to work. If you don't have any people to work, then that's an ultimate challenge.
Timbang says she staffed her housekeeping department thanks to temporary foreign workers. The city of Thompson hopes to launch a northern immigration program to help get skilled trades jobs filled. The board president at the Manitoba Dental Association is excited about the federal government's new dental plan. But Dr. Scott Leckie also worries about how it's going to roll out. He wishes the government had consultant dentists earlier.
Dentists are the experts in oral health care, and it would have been nice to have a little bit more time to ensure that this program gets rolled out properly. There is still time to negotiate and advocate, probably is the better word, to advocate to the government about their plan, and we just want it to be a success the first time.
The $13 billion plan will cover routine dental procedures for low and middle income Canadians who don't have private insurance. It will begin with eligible seniors as early as next spring. It's not yet clear how dentists will sign up for the plan, how much they'll be compensated, or if there will be enough dentists to meet the demand. Today, at the United Nations, a symbolic vote about the future of Gaza. The UN General Assembly will decide whether to support a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war, with local officials reporting more than 18,000 Palestinians now killed in that conflict. The resolution has a lot of international support, but not where it counts on the UN Security Council. You can hear more on this story, as well as other national and international news on World Report at 8. The director of CSIS was in Winnipeg yesterday talking about the human costs of foreign interference. David Vigneault told a crowd at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights some of Canada's adversaries have no limits on what they'll try to do to infiltrate Canadian society and repress critics. He uses the example of the People's Republic of China.
No one should be under any illusion about the breadth of the PRC's efforts to infiltrate our political systems, our private sector, government institutions, universities, and communities from coast to coast to coast.
Vigneault says the human toll of human interference directly affects Canadians, from eroding their ability to express their opinions to putting their lives in danger. You can find more news updated throughout the day. All you have to do is head to cbc.ca/Manitoba.
Thank you so much, Heather.
You're welcome. Thank you.
That's Heather Wells from the CBC Newsroom. You're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 189.3 FM in Winnipeg. I'm Emily Brass, filling in this week for Marcy Markusa. Abby Adiyemi is our studio technician, and our show director, Pat Kanuga, joins us now with a look at weather and traffic.
Good morning, everyone. When that sun rises at 8:16, we should see it. We're looking pretty clear over the city of Winnipeg right now, looking at satellite imagery right now. Some cloud cover down in the Pembina Valley towards the U.S. border and out towards the White Shell as well. But we have a lot of clear skies over Dauphin, central Manitoba, and Winnipeg, and Brandon looks to be clear as well. Maybe a little bit partly cloudy. Temperature-wise, we're at -11 right now at the Forks. We're going to get today to a -7 with a mix of sun and cloud. According to John Sauter, he is our meteorologist here at CBC Manitoba. Southwest winds 10 to 20 this afternoon, so not breezy like yesterday. Tonight, clear down to -11. Tomorrow, a -2. After that, we're going to see a -3 that we wake up to on Thursday morning. We'll get to a 3 that day, at least a 3 that day. Environment Canada says a 6. John has a 3 here, and Friday, a +1. Into our weekend, a -2 and a -4, so these minus single digits continue. And Emily, I did look up the extended forecast from our friends at the Weather Network, -2 on Christmas Day. In case you were wondering, I just thought I would foreshadow that. Let's bring it back to Brandon right now, since this is the regional forecast from the CBC Forecast Center. -15 and a few clouds kicking around in Brandon right now, but on the way to a -6. Wind will be northwest 30, becoming southwest 20 this morning. Wind chill about -13 this afternoon. Tonight, a chilly -18, but tomorrow sunshine and a daytime high of 0. Going to be a sloppy one tomorrow. And Thompson, good morning. You are -17 right now with some light snow, a mix of sun and cloud in the forecast. Temperature's going to fall a couple of degrees to -19 this morning. Then it'll rise to about -15 this afternoon. Tonight, clear, cold, -26, but tomorrow, much warmer and a high of -6 with the clouds. Temps at this hour, hovering around -10s in some places, but we're going to get to -6s and -7s for the most part. So Gimli, Morden, Winkler, -11s right now. Melita, -14. Whiteshell, -10. Steinbach is -10. Dauphin, Parkland, you are -13. You too will get to a -6 today. And Pinawa, -10 on the way to a -8. Once again, we're -11. Streets in Winnipeg are mostly dry in the main drags, but on the side streets could be a little bit slippery still, a little bit greasy, as they were yesterday at this time. So haven't heard anything about major stalls or crashes. Do let me know, though, about your commute. If there's something you need to report at 788-3093. I'm standing by for your calls.
Thank you, Pat.
Thank you.
Be careful out there. I'm sure there's some really slippery spots, especially if you're walking through a parking lot or something. Just be cautious, please. Thank you. You're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 189.3 FM in Winnipeg, and worldwide on our CBC Manitoba YouTube page. We've got our producer of that YouTube channel here in studio with us, Travis Peterson, and also you can hear us on the CBC Listen app. Well, the Royal Manitoba Theatre Centre will be looking for a new executive director next season. Camilla Holland has held that role for the past 13 years, but today the Royal MTC is announcing her departure, and she joins us now by Zoom. Good morning, Camilla.
Good morning, Emily. It feels very real when you say it like that.
I know, I bet, right? Like that's quite an adjustment after you've been in that role for so long. Why are you leaving?
Absolutely. Well, I think, first of all, these jobs are positions that the board hires on contract. And so there was a moment when I signed my last contract and I thought, this might be a really good time for the organization to look for new leadership. I think you need to shake up the executive chef in a kitchen occasionally. And so I think in this case, it felt like the right time for me personally and the right time for the organization. I've had an extraordinary 13 years, nothing but bangers, but it's just a good time for me to look for a different mountain to climb.
So what was it like working at Royal MTC? I'm sure a lot of people, have thought about having a job like yours. What was it like?
Well, the job is an extraordinary one, and part of that is the partnership you have with artistic directors. So I had the great benefit of joining 13 years ago and coming in with Stephen Shipper, who was the artistic director for a long time. He's our artistic director emeritus now. And then I got to do an artistic director transition, which is a really quite wonderful and glorious thing to be part of as a team member. And then I got to go through COVID, which was less glorious and slightly more challenging with that extended intermission. So there's been some really, really extraordinary highlights, but really you're holding the organization for the future of the community, and you're holding it for the benefit of the community. And those are important and wonderful things to do.
And you touched on some of the bangers during your run, your 13-year run. What do you take away from all the productions that have been put on by the Royal MTC in your time?
I mean, I'm always in awe of the talent on our stage. Like, let's be clear, these are incredible artists and craftspeople and creative people who are making magic for audiences. And I feel so lucky to give them the resources and the time and the opportunity they deserve. And that's really my role, is to make sure that they're in a safe and happy space when they're creating, and then to bring an audience to make that magic happen, which we know does when you're live. But everybody always wants to ask what your favorite productions are. And it's a bit like choosing your favorite child. You have one, to be clear. You're just not prepared to say it out loud. There's been incredible standout productions over the years, and I know audience members always have their own favorites. But I'm going to shout out for the future production. The great thing about theater is there's always something coming around the corner, and we have some amazing plays coming up in the rest of the season that I think, if people are curious, they should come and check out.
Oh, but you must be able to name a few of your favorites. I mean, you've had The Color Purple, The Three Musketeers, so many big names. Tell us,
Yes, I'll put two on the table. So I will say, under Stephen Shipper, Billy Elliot, we were one of the first Canadian regional theaters to do that show. It was an extraordinary partnership. We built two Billies. We trained these incredible dancers to do the ballet and the tap and the boxing and the singing they needed to, in partnership with the Royal Winnipeg Ballet School. That whole show was just a love letter to Winnipeg and the talent that is here. And under Kelly's tenure, The Secret to Good Tea by Rosanna Deerchild last season was an unbelievable high point. A real kind of act of incredible truth-telling on our stage by Rosanna in her playwriting debut, but also just an incredible act of reconciliation for our settler audience members. And so those two are really the really huge highlights that I'll hold with me.
And of course, you can hear Rosanna Deerchild here on CBC Radio. She's the host of Unreserved.
You can. I mean, she's got an extraordinary career as a storyteller, but this was her first play, and we were unbelievably proud to bring it to its fruition as a world premiere. And I'm not going to overshare, but I think it's going to get productions across Canada. It's a really beautiful piece of work.
Mm-hmm. So we've been hearing this morning and from your colleagues that your work has gone far beyond the Royal MTC, that you advocate for arts locally, provincially, federally. Tell us about that.
Yeah, one of the great joys of being in these roles is that you get to do kind of big picture thinking with the sector. And so I've been really fortunate to do advocacy work with a number of organizations, but I'm probably most proud of my work with Manitobans for the Arts. I was one of the founding board members. It's an organization that really is trying to advance the sector in the general way in this beautiful province that we love. And I think, proudest moment there was during the pandemic, which was really just this unbelievably disruptive time for performing and visual arts and cultural organizations, we were able to advocate very strongly to the provincial government at the time to invest in our recovery. And so I'm really proud of those funds, and really proud of the province stepping up when it needed to make sure that organizations that were here pre-pandemic have survived through that time.
Yeah, you mentioned the long intermission of the pandemic. And how did you navigate that, as the director? Were you able to keep things going in some way?
Yeah, I mean, let's be clear, it's always a team effort, and I work with an incredible board of trustees of volunteers and incredible paid staff as well. We made really strategic and heartbreaking choices. We did an awful lot of canceling. I've been a producer of work all my life, and it was the most unproducing I'd ever done, kind of collapsing and changing what we were doing to try and meet the requirements and the needs. I think some some great shoots came up through that time, including the incredible support of Manitobans. You know, we saw a record number of donations, we saw record numbers of support in that time. But it's really good to get people back in live and our audience sitting cheek to cheek. You know, we're so thrilled that we are here to engage in that act of imagining to get together and live again.
And before you go, Camila, what's next for you?
Well, I have a mentor who says it's really great once in a while to jump out a plane without a parachute. So I don't know what's next, but as I'm saying to everybody who will listen, open for opportunities, 2 university kids on the payroll, and very much keen to try and find a way to stay in Winnipeg. I love this community, I love this city, and I'd love to be a patron and a supporter of the arts for years to come.
So stay tuned.
Thank you.
Thank you, Camila. Camila Holland is the outgoing executive director of the Royal Manitoba Theatre Centre. The MTC is starting the search for a new executive director today.
Christmas is a time for magic.
The talking snowman. Well, you don't surprise me anymore.
For tradition.
One just has to have a present from Santa. You do it, Arthur.
And a time for love.
Be kind. And if you really want to see what people are, all you have to do is look.
Enjoy holiday favorites all Christmas Day on CBC and CBC Gem.
It's 7:45 right now, and you're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM in Winnipeg, also on the CBC Listen app and our CBC Manitoba YouTube page. I'm Emily Brass, filling in this week for Marcy Markusa. Well, Basketball Manitoba says more players are signing up, with registration growing 23% this year. Later on in the show, we're going to hear more about what's driving the numbers up and how that organization plans to keep the momentum going. And if food inflation has been getting you to cut back on spending, well, there's a word for that. And CBC's Ellis Cho will also be here to talk to us about that. Well, bilingual Franco-Manitoban artist Fiora Luna, also known as Geneviève Freinet, recently unveiled her first English single, I'm Going to Let You In. The single is following the September 2023 release of her debut single, En Français, Mon Sort. This second track, sung in English, takes us on a journey to discover another aspect of Fiora Luna's universe. Have a listen to I'm Going to Let You In by Fiora Luna. What a lovely voice. That was Fiora Luna with I'm Going to Let You In. The tune is now available on all streaming platforms. 10 minutes before 8 o'clock, you're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM in Winnipeg. Right now it's minus 11 at the Forks, and today we're going to see a mix of sun and clouds with a high of minus 7, kind of breezy. Tonight, mainly clear with a low of minus 11. Then tomorrow, mainly sunny, going up to a high of minus 2. Well, a group of researchers has been crunching the numbers, and they say it's getting harder for Manitoba families to make ends meet. The province boosted minimum wage earlier this year up to $15.30 an hour. The Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives Manitoba says it's still not enough. It released an updated living wage calculation today for Winnipeg, Brandon, and Thompson. Niall Harney joins us now. He's a senior researcher with the CCPA. Hi, Niall.
Hi, Emily.
So when we talk about a living wage, what does that really mean?
So this is a calculation the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives puts together. We have multiple offices around the country, and we do this for many cities. So we look at a family of 4 with 2 working parents and 2 kids, one in school and one in daycare. What does it cost after you take into account taxes paid as well as benefits like the Canada Child Benefit? What's the wage that family needs to earn, both parents, in order to make ends meet?
And of course, you're looking at multiple cities, multiple situations. How do you calculate that?
So we look at 10 categories of expenses. We look at rent, food, the cost of transportation, as well as the cost of household goods like internet, a phone bill, furniture, and we put those together, and then we subtract the contributions from government social programs as well as taxes paid, and we find out what's the wage that's needed.
Mm-hmm. So what did you find when you looked at minimum wage?
So we found that since last year in Winnipeg, the living wage has gone up by 87 cents to $19.21 an hour. In Brandon, it's gone up by 3 cents to $15.69 an hour. And in Thompson, it's gone up by 85 cents to $17.48 an hour. So that's a big jump in 1 year.
Mm-hmm. And you calculated the living wage, for 3 different cities, but I mean, they differ from city to city, and these numbers are for a family of 4 with 2 working parents. How are these needs different for single income homes?
So single parents, we calculate those numbers for as well. And so in Winnipeg, a single parent with 1 kid would need to earn $25.46 an hour. In Brandon, it's about $13.66, and then in Thompson, it's $25.38. And the reason for that Brandon number is because of the way government benefits work here in Manitoba. None of the families, except for the single parent in Brandon, was able to use rent assist or the provincial childcare benefit. So when you bring those to the table, it really reduces the wage that a family needs.
So that's pretty surprising, but what was the most shocking discovery?
I think what's really surprising for us this year is, it's no surprise for anyone who's been to the grocery store in the last year that the living wage has gone up, but we saw the really strong effect that government universal programs can have. So for each family, the income required or the monthly costs went up by around $280 to $300, but costs went down by $220 for childcare because of $10 a day childcare brought in by the federal government, which really, really brought down costs. So we see that when government brings in strong social programs, universal programs, it really brings down those costs for working families.
Mm-hmm. And the costs must be different from city to city too.
Yeah. I mean, if you're accessing $10 a day childcare, that's a universal program, and we do need to see movement from the provincial government on childcare. We have got this $10 a day program, which is fabulous, but we need to move a lot further on getting spaces available so that everyone can access it. The government's currently only built about 1,500 spaces of the over 20,000 promised as part of the agreement.
Mm-hmm. But like the cost of living, I guess, with rent and groceries and stuff would be different in Thompson, different in Brandon than in Winnipeg.
It is. And particularly in Thompson, we did use a northern allowance to try and get some of those costs. And then there's the difference in the price of rent. So rent is the major contributor to the increase in the living wage, and rent is different in those cities. So that's kind of the main reason we see those differences.
And why are we seeing those kinds of increases?
Well, that's a good question. Since the pandemic, we've seen an economy roar back to life. We've seen inflation increase in a way we haven't in many years, and that's certainly causing prices to rise across the board. We're seeing that moderate now, and we're having an opportunity here for families to catch up with wage increases, like an increase to the living wage.
Mm-hmm. And something we hear from businesses is that raising the minimum wage can be hard on them, and they have to find a way to offer higher pay. In this case, nearly $4 an hour to reach that living wage. I mean, what would you say to a business owner who's struggling with that?
I would say it's we're putting a launch on this morning for our living wage calculations at 10 o'clock. And we have 3 business owners who are joining us to talk about the fact that they're living wage employers and that they're proud to be living wage employers because they see this as an investment in their workforce and an investment in their community. And there's lots of research to show that there's benefits in terms of retention and recruitment and reducing training costs that come with paying a living wage. But I think it's important to zoom out to the broader perspective. Generally, when we raise the living wage or raise the minimum wage to a living wage, we see an effect where the negative employment effects are offset by positives because of the added incomes that low-income households have that mostly get spent in the community. And I think it's important that we talk about the added cost of when we allow poverty wages in our community. It brings a lot of stress to the community. People can't afford decent food. They have to work multiple jobs. They may be housing insecure. And that's stress that shows up in our school system, in our education system, in our hospital system. And that's a cost that ultimately we all pay as a society. So I think it's important that we ensure that working families are able to earn a wage that lets them make ends meet.
Thanks so much for joining us in person here today, Niall.
Thanks for having me.
Niall Harney is a senior researcher with Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, Manitoba. It's now just a few minutes before 8 o'clock, and you're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM in Winnipeg. I'm Emily Brass, filling in this week for Marcy Markusa. And right now, we'll take a look at the news headlines with Heather Wells.
Good morning. A Point Douglas woman says she is heartbroken after 2 people were found dead in a tent. Winnipeg fire paramedics were called to that tent at Joe Zukin Park on Euclid Avenue yesterday afternoon. Catherine Flynn at Point Douglas Residents Committee wants to see more forward thinking when it comes to helping homeless people in her neighborhood. In the city of Thompson, businesses are grappling with a staffing shortage. Even the municipal government has a vacancy rate of more than 10%. And the Best Western Hotel in Thompson's been so short-staffed, at one point the general manager was cleaning hotel rooms. We'll hear more in our next local news at 8:30.
Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
That's CBC's Heather Wells from the newsroom. Well, still to come on the show, more Manitobans want to slam dunk. That's according to Basketball Manitoba, which is seeing a big jump in registrations this year. We'll hear more about how the Winnipeg Sea Bears have contributed to that growth at 8:10. A mix of sun and clouds today with a high of -7 in Winnipeg, breezy and mainly clear tonight, going down to a low of -11, mainly sunny tomorrow with a high of -2. If you're seeing anything out in traffic, please give us a call. Let us know what you're seeing. We've been talking about that north-south connection now that Arlington Bridge is gone, and maybe you're even taking a bike and seeing a difference. Give us a call and let us know. That number 204-788-3093. World Report is up next.
On Cue with Tom Power.
Z-Way has made a career examining the line between comedy and confrontation, especially when it comes to race. Z-Way will be here to talk about her new book and why asking how many black friends do you have is such a revealing question.
It's almost like a cultural litmus test.
That's coming up on Cue, followed by Commotion with Elamine Abdel Mahmoud on CBC Radio 1, the CBC Listen app, and everywhere you get your podcasts.
News is next. Coming up in half an hour, it's The Current with Matt Galloway.
The San Jose Galleon has sat at the bottom of the sea for 300 years, filled with gold and jewels that could be worth $20 billion. Colombia's government wants to retrieve the ship. Not everyone is on board. That story coming up on The Current.
This is World Report.
Good morning from CBC News. I'm John Northcott. A symbolic vote about the future of Gaza will take place at the United Nations today. The UN General Assembly will decide whether to support a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war. With local officials reporting more than 18,000 Palestinians now killed in that conflict, the resolution has a lot of international support, but not where it counts, on the UN Security Council. The CBC's Abby Kugadassan reports.
The world's conscience is dead, says this elderly Palestinian man standing in the rubble of his destroyed home in Han Yunis. Thousands of kilometers away, the world will gather at the United Nations General Assembly and vote on a non-binding resolution calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. This vote comes after a similar vote failed last week at the UN Security Council. 13 of 15 members voted in favor, but the U.S. blocked that draft resolution with its veto. The UK abstained. Former British diplomat Tom Fletcher.
That Gaza is becoming a slaughterhouse. So I think it's time that the UK gets off the fence.
Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly hasn't said how Canada will vote today.
We are still looking at the different versions of the resolution. We're negotiating. There are different amendments that are being discussed.
She herself has stopped short of calling for a complete ceasefire, but she says the violence in Gaza must end.
We need to make sure that the way that Israel is conducting itself is in line with international humanitarian law. Eventually, of course, we will support any form of accountability system at the international level that will look into this issue.
On Monday, Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant rejected the possibility of ending the military offensive in Gaza. He said the IDF's operation to defeat Hamas will take time. Abby Kuwadassan, CBC News, Berlin.
It is a crucial time for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. He's in Washington today trying to convince lawmakers to keep the financial aid flowing for his country's war efforts against Russia. But as freelance journalist Steve Futterman reports, Zelensky's chances of getting more money are starting to look bleak.
Across Washington today, Volodymyr Zelensky will be asking U.S. lawmakers for billions of dollars in aid.
The whole world is watching us.
Money that he says is absolutely necessary to continue fighting Russian forces.
Ukrainians haven't given up and won't give up.
Zelensky spoke yesterday at Washington's National Defense University. Today he will be making the rounds on Capitol Hill and at the White House. Biden administration officials are telling reluctant Republicans that military aid is a key to Ukraine's survival. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan.
We're running out of money, and we are nearly out of time. Any member of Congress who does not support funding for Ukraine is voting for an outcome that will make it easier for Putin to prevail.
But Republicans are insisting that any money for Ukraine must also include money for security at the U.S.-Mexico border. Last week, a bill that only included money for Ukraine was defeated, bringing an angry response from Joe Biden.
History's going to judge harshly those who turn their back on freedom's cause. We can't let Putin win.
Former U.S. Ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul.
Ukraine is running out of ammunition. They already are running out of missiles for their air defense systems.
This will be a critical day for Zelensky, asking for continued support from Washington as the Russian invasion stretches into yet another winter. Steve Futterman for CBC News, Los Angeles.
Jailed Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny is still missing somewhere within Russia's prison system. Today, he failed to appear for a court hearing by video link. Prison officials are blaming an electrical problem, but Navalny's daughter, Dasha Navalny, told CNN she doesn't believe that.
Whenever my dad has a court hearing, he uses that to speak up against the war or tell people to question the regime. And Putin has actually just announced that he is going to be running for re-election, and they don't want my father to speak up against that.
A spokesperson for Navalny says he was supposed to be moved from the penal colony he's been held in since the middle of last year to a harsher special regime colony. But the process of moving prisoners by rail across Russia can take weeks, and their lawyers often don't have contact with them until they arrive at the destination. Russia's presidential election is set to be held in March. In Japan, a court has found 3 former soldiers guilty of sexually assaulting a female colleague. The case had been dropped, but the victim came forward demanding a reinvestigation outside the courthouse. Rina Gonoy told reporters the guilty verdict shows the acts towards her were not a joke, but an actual crime. Ganoy says she hopes the defendants think about what they did and reflect deeply on their actions. The reinvestigation Ganoy called for prompted a military-wide harassment probe. The convicted former soldiers won't actually serve time in prison, but advocates are still calling this a rare victory for survivors who dare to challenge taboos around abuse. Police in Mississauga, Ontario, will update the public next hour on their investigation into Kenneth Law. The accused poison seller was charged yesterday with murder in connection with multiple deaths across Ontario. As Thomas Daigle reports, families are demanding justice not just in Canada, but around the world.
I told my mom right away. She was about ready to break into tears.
When Gerald Cohn in Chicago learned Kenneth Law was facing new charges of second-degree murder in Ontario, he says he considered it encouraging news, while he awaits similar action in the U.S.
I want something where I can say, we got justice for Benji.
His 34-year-old brother Benjamin died by suicide in February after placing an online order from Kenneth Law. Police allege the 58-year-old Toronto area man sold a toxic substance and other items for self-harm to vulnerable clients around the world. Law was already charged with counseling or aiding suicide in Ontario. Now investigators are set to explain what led them to add 14 charges of murder.
It's a mix of emotions for me.
David Parfitt's son Tom was 22 when his body was found next to a package linked to Law.
We had all the evidence that we needed 2 years ago. And yet, unfortunately, in those 2 years, more people died.
Police in Calgary, Saskatoon, and other Canadian cities are reviewing sudden deaths for possible connections to Law. 21-year-old Stephen Mitchell Jr. from Toronto died in March. His father told us he's pleased with the murder charges because, in his words, they better reflect the nature of the crime. Thomas Daigle, CBC News, Toronto.
International negotiators are working past the deadline at the UN climate talks in Dubai. A deal is now overdue. A main sticking point is how and when to eventually wean the world off of oil and gas. A preliminary agreement struck yesterday said countries could reduce use by 2050 rather than phasing it out. Critics are now singling out Saudi Arabia and a handful of other countries for resisting such an agreement. Alex Sharma is a British politician and former COP president.
All of these countries need to understand what is at stake, and they need to remind themselves because climate change does not recognize borders.
An updated agreement is still being discussed, and talks are officially supposed to finish today, but could stretch into tomorrow until a final deal is reached. Ottawa is proposing new legislation to create drinking water standards in First Nations. Right now, there are no national regulations for drinking water or wastewater on reserve. Olivia Stefanovich reports.
We've been under a boil water advisory for 28 years, over 10,500 days.
Every new day extends Niskandiga's boil water advisory, the longest of any First Nation in the country. Chief Chris Muniz says he hopes Ottawa's new bill will prevent a repeat of what's happening to his home in a remote part of northwestern Ontario.
Once there's a boil water advisory, it will get addressed right away, as opposed to waiting 28 years.
Bill C-61 aims to create minimum national standards for drinking water and wastewater in First Nations.
What we have is more than a start.
Erica Bowden is the chief of Cowessess First Nation in Saskatchewan.
Indigenous people, Indigenous children deserve to be conceived, born, and die drinking clean water.
For too long, Indigenous Services Minister Patty Haidu says First Nations lagged far behind municipal water systems.
We've changed that under our government, but this bill would put that into law.
The proposed law also aims to replace legislation introduced by the previous Conservative government, repealed after it faced widespread criticism from First Nations over a lack of consultation and funding. Olivia Stefanovich, CBC News, Ottawa.
And that is the latest national and international news from World Report. I'm John Northcott. This is CBC News.
you'll definitely want to break out those leather layers today, because those winter layers, you really need them today, because you'll be expecting that sunshine throughout the day with a transition to a mix of sun and clouds as we head into the afternoon. And then we'll be heading to a high of around -7 today. However, you need to hold on to your hats, because the wind from the northwest make it to feel like it's -22 later in the morning, and then around -14 later this afternoon due to that wind chill. Tonight, as the night falls, we're going to be having clear skies, and it's going to prevail all night and giving you that chance to gaze at the stars. If you're one of the stargazers out there, definitely you'll be having clear skies tonight. The wind will definitely ease up a bit, and then reaching up to it's going to be reaching up to 15 kilometers, and then the temperatures will drop to a low of -18 degrees. And of course, we'll be expecting some frosty -27 overnight. So,
ouch.
Yeah, so just you might want to warm yourself up for that. But the good news is tomorrow is going to be warm.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I'll say. So definitely Pat is going to come in at before the show end to give you more snapshot of what the weather would look like for the rest of the day and tomorrow.
It's coming up on 8:15, and you're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1. I'm Emily Brass. Well, maybe it was the Winnipeg Sea Bears or Team Canada's performance at the FIBA Basketball World Cup in September. Whatever the reason, basketball registration in this province is seeing growth this year of 23%. The numbers come from Basketball Manitoba, and to learn more, we've reached Adam Wedlake, Executive Director of Basketball Manitoba. Good morning, Adam.
Hey, Emily, how you doing?
Great. So what was your initial reaction to those numbers?
Well, it was surprising, to be honest. We usually see 5% in a good year, and obviously the last couple of years, a few years ago with the pandemic, the numbers were flatlined and even declining, of course, with everything we went through. But yeah, it was amazing to see real numbers come into fruition over the last month or so once we sort of see our final registration numbers through the fall settle in. So yeah, it was an amazing number to see where we're at right now.
And so which age group saw the biggest growth?
Really across the board. Like we run programming basically starting around age 5, even 4-year-olds sometimes, and right up through adult, sort of the recreation play, different leagues and so on, right through as old as you can kind of play. We still see players up until their 60s still playing in some capacity, and so it was really pretty even across the board. Actually, that was our biggest spike, was adult basketball, and that's that age 18 plus, and quite a while. You got 40 plus years ahead of you there if you can still make it to 65 still on the court kind of range. So yeah, it was pleasant to see it was not just one specific category.
So much fun, especially for the older players. What do you think helped drove up the numbers?
Well, like you said in your intro there, this Winnipeg Sea Bears presence, I think, would carry the biggest lone reason. They started up last spring, and that was a 25-year gap from the last time there was a pro basketball presence here in the province. And so to see that come to fruition, because that's one thing to see fans and support and people in the crowds and supporting, that was amazing and awesome. Love to see it, but sometimes you don't know if that will actually translate into new participation. And that includes like players, coaches, officials, volunteers, and that's where we're seeing this really come into its own over just in the last 6 months, really, of their presence.
And then how about the national team? Do you think that played a role too?
That's a big part. It was perfect timing because it was right in the midst of when we were getting going for the fall. It was late summer, early fall. And the fact that the men's national team finished third in the world, which has never happened before, shone the spotlight on our sport a little heavier than it would have been. And then the team that they now qualified for the Paris Olympics this coming summer, which is even a bigger stage and spotlight that'll draw. And again, that's the first time that team has reached that level since the 2000 Olympics in Sydney. So that's another generation that's seeing a bit of stagnation. So we're really seeing sort of a double storm here, of the perfect storm of excitement around our sport, and obviously the numbers show that.
And then you also saw more new female players in a pretty male-dominated sport at this point, when you think of the NBA. How do you plan to keep encouraging women to play?
Well, that is one of our challenges for sure. The other one being continuing to grow the game outside of the larger centers of Winnipeg and the more rural, especially northern areas of Manitoba. But yeah, on the female side, we typically, if we were to open the doors and say, all right, let's everybody come one, come all. Typically, out of 10 people showing up, 7 would be male, 3 would be female. So that's a challenge for sure. We want to, of course, get that parity as close as we can to 50-50. But we did see, just because of the two examples I've given, are the Sea Bears and the Olympic team are both male teams. That was definitely not exclusive to just male growth. So we've seen actually a bit more parity of a 60-40 split of the new growth, which was good to see, great to see. And but to keep them going and active, that's the challenge, and not just on the female side, but on the male side. It's like a store. Sometimes it's maybe easier to get the customer in the first time, but how do you get them back the second time and keep them coming back? And that's our challenge, of course, is to give people the positive experience that they're looking for, and they'll come back because they've had it, and year 2 will be even stronger than year 1, kind of comparing just where we are right now. So, yeah, it's an ongoing thing, and also it does trickle upwards because a lot of our coaches, our officials, our volunteers typically come out of being former or semi-retired players that are still looking to stay involved. So more females playing at a young age equates typically to more females staying involved in the sport in a different capacity, like a coach or a referee.
Do they end up having to play with males then because there aren't enough females for a team?
At the younger ages, yeah, that's sort of that first step into the sports. Typically, it's quite male-dominated. There are other things, like I have 2 daughters that came through our system as well, that when they were quite young and they starting out, they were pretty heavily involved with gymnastics and dance and a few other things that are probably very, very heavy female-dominated. And then there's sort of that balancing act through the sort of the 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 range that we see more involvement. So yeah, it's that getting any young girl to want to start playing some basketball. And these good stories, feel-good stories like this that are either local or around the world. The women's national team for basketball has been very dominant internationally for a number of years now too. So that never hurts too, to have good people doing good things.
Mm-hmm. And so, how does Basketball Manitoba plan on continuing growing the sport in general?
In general, it's sort of success breeds success often, and using these good feel-good stories, staying. The success of the Winnipeg Sea Bears, they're heading into year 2, is their success is our sport's success, and they know that. We know that. They've been amazing to work with right from before the team was even announced in the very early stages, and they came out of the gates very community-oriented, and as they continue to today. So it's working with them and continuing to just use our sports to help address some of the challenges of society, of keeping kids healthy, active, in school, in positive groups, doing things that will, in the long term, help society out. So using our sport as a positive stroke to keep people on the positive side of life, doing things.
Yeah, well, and earlier you touched on wanting to get more rural and northern communities involved. What areas of Manitoba still need help? Getting some momentum on basketball.
Yeah, the further remote you get, the challenge, it's definitely not just a basketball, or just other sports have the same challenge of just getting it into very remote communities, and then sometimes the cost and the travel and just the geographic barriers that are there sometimes. And but by bringing a sport, basketball is very widely participated in, very popular among wide ranges of different backgrounds and ages and so on. But it is that challenge of getting it into the communities that have quite a challenge of just getting anything active at times. And sometimes you need that community champion, is what we would call them, a person who would take on things and then make things happen. We can provide as many supports and resources and sort of startup initiatives as we can, but you need that long-term person who's going to be there to sustain it, and that's the challenge that happens. Sometimes that person's there for a short period, and then they they leave themselves, and we're sort of back to square one. But that's part of why we're here to do things like this.
So calling those community champions, winter's coming, it's a good indoor sport. But before we let you go, the name Wedlake is well known in Winnipeg basketball circles. Your dad, Bill, and Uncle Ross coached for decades. Bill at the UW, Ross at the high school level. What do they think of this new surge in interest in basketball?
Well, they love talking. My uncle Ross, he's actually board of directors. He's been our president up until just this last year. He stepped aside into a different role with us as a volunteer. But yeah, that's in our blood, and we love to see. Definitely dominates our dinner tables and whatnot to talk about the game and the intricacies of all this. And a lot of times we get mired down in the challenges and not sort of step back and look at the success like that. That's right at this moment here to sort of see a step back and say this is good things are happening, and they love to see it as well. They've been around the game since their infancy, so it's definitely a sport that's heavily rooted in our family. So yeah, love talking with our family about all this.
What a great moment. And right before Christmas, maybe you're even hanging up little basketball ornaments. I don't know. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Adam.
Sure. Thanks, Emily. Always happy to talk.
Adam Wedlake is Executive Director of Basketball Manitoba.
There are stories you just can't stop thinking about. They take you somewhere, they introduce you to someone, they share something new with you.
Liftoff.
Those are the stories you want to share with your friends, and CBC's award-winning documentary team is bringing them to you every week on Storylines. Storylines, new this season on CBC Radio 1, and always on demand on the CBC Listen app.
24 minutes after 8 o'clock, you're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1. I'm Emily Brass, filling in this week for Marcy Markusa. Bigger, larger, more seems to be the way of things. The global population keeps going up, buildings just keep getting taller, and just look at what inflation is doing to your food bill. CBC producer Ellis Cho finds more Canadians are now trying to tap the brakes on spending by making do with less.
Susanna Tobar and her family are meat eaters. There's nothing they love more than throwing a big, fat, juicy steak on that barbecue. But these days,
we are eating like more vegetables, as well like kind of bread, beans.
Grocery prices are still high, on average 20% higher than 2 years ago. So something's got to give. Instead of grabbing beef and chicken at the grocery store, Susanna just buys chicken. Instead of buying it every week, she's buying it every 3 weeks to stretch out every meal.
Let's say instead of just eating like the chicken in the plate with the salad, we try to make it with pastas. So that's why we try just to cut it in little pieces, put it in the pasta, and in that way you have more space because groceries...
Kathy Parada has a word for this. It's
lessitarianism, meaning not vegan, not vegetarian, but people who eat meat and fish and poultry, but are looking to cut back on their weekly intake. We've seen that number rise.
Kathy is the VP of Market Strategy at Ipsos. She tracks consumer eating and drinking habits. She says this year, nearly half of all Canadians say they're trying to eat less meat.
If we look back to 2022 and 2021, we would have seen that health, environmental concerns topped the reason that people were looking to cut back on meat intake. But over the past year, interestingly, cost or the cost of meat has risen to the number one position.
Kathy says that spike is pushing more people to try meatless Mondays, especially baby boomers.
That's not surprising because they are the biggest meat eaters.
Well, I think it's not surprising that people are eating differently. We're seeing a lot of changes in behavior. I think people are shopping.
Mike Von Masso is a food economist at the University of Guelph. He says these days Canadians are dining out less, buying less, and eating less.
I know lots of how families are eating smaller portion sizes, and that's, what we're being encouraged to do by the Canadian Food Guide anyway. Half your plate. should be fresh fruits and vegetables. But I think also some people are putting off for the occasional meal and eating a vegetarian option, which may be cheaper.
Less meat, more mung beans. For years, we've been told eating less meat is better for our health and the environment. So, could high prices be the thing that convinces more Canadians, like Susanna Tobar, to become lentil-loving vegetarians?
I don't think so, because still the meat is really good. The chicken is nice, the steak is good, the pork is delicious. So it's something that I will continue eating for sure.
Just less.
Correct. Just less. That's true. Just less.
For the cost of living, I'm Ellis Cho.
And for more stories about money and the economic forces that surround us, subscribe to CBC's Cost of Living podcast, which you can find wherever you get your podcasts, or catch the show later this morning at 11:30 here on CBC Radio 1. Also still to come on CBC Radio 1 is The Current, coming on after this show. This is a time of year when most people are cooking a lot, and often for more people than usual. And, of course, so many holidays are centered around food. Coming up on The Current, Jonathan Chung and Lucy Waverman recommend some of their favorite cookbooks from 2023, because even with the advent of online recipes, cookbooks still have a place. Of course, they never go dark on you like your cell phone when you're trying to stir something up. Join host Matt Galloway after the 8:30 news. Well, right now in Winnipeg at the Forks, it's -11. We're going up to a high of -7 today with a mix of sun and clouds and pretty breezy. Tonight, mainly clear, going down to a low of -11. And tomorrow, mainly sunny, high -2. Then on Thursday, it's going to get a lot milder and sunny with a high of +3, still a bit breezy. And looking ahead to Friday, a mix of sun and clouds with a high of +1. You're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM in Winnipeg, on our CBC Manitoba YouTube channel, as well as on the CBC Listen app. I'm Emily Brass, filling in this week for Marcy Markusa. Abby Adiyemi is our studio technician, and Pat Kanuga is our show director. The CBC News is next.
This is CBC News. Good morning. I'm Heather Wells in Winnipeg. At 8:30, it is -11. This is going to be the coldest day of the week, but still above seasonal. The normal high is -10 today, mix of sun and clouds, and -7. A man had to be hospitalized with weather-related injuries after illegally crossing into Canada during a storm this past weekend. RCMP received a report of 4 people trying to cross the border overland just after 7 Saturday morning. They found 4 men, 1 suffering from injuries due to cold. The other 3 were not hurt. RCMP patrolled the area looking for any others who might be crossing into Canada, but no one else was found. Police warn winter weather can quickly turn deadly and say people should only cross the border at ports of entry. A Point Douglas woman says she is heartbroken after 2 people were found dead in a tent. Winnipeg fire paramedics were called to a tent at Joe Zuken Park on Euclid Avenue yesterday afternoon. They found 2 people pronounced dead at the scene. Catherine Flynn is the chair of the Point Douglas Residents Committee.
There's been a lot of talk about, people have a right to live on the land in tents and they have a right to inhabit bus shelters. I would like to see a concerted effort to find people decent places to live, because often they're not in decent places, and that's why they're living in tents.
Manitoba's Office of the Medical Examiner is working to determine the cause of death of the 2 people. Cancelled home care visits and time restraints have prompted a woman in St. Andrews to hire her own home care workers. Joanne Brown coordinates her mother's care under Manitoba's Self and Family Managed Care Program. Home care traditionally is provided through the province's Regional Health Authority. Brown started managing her mom's care because she could no longer rely on the local health authority.
It's because of how much staff they have to do what they have to do. Staff was only allotted 20 minutes for both my parents to get them up, change their catheter bags, get them dressed, get them ready to go.
The Interlake Eastern Regional Health Authority says it's currently dealing with staffing vacancies in Selkirk. The health region is seeing an increase in people who manage their own care, but could not link that to staffing in the region. The head of the Manitoba Dental Association has questions about how the new federal dental plan will be rolled out. That plan will cover routine dental procedures for low and middle income Canadians who don't have private insurance. It will begin with eligible seniors as early as next spring. Board President Dr. Scott Leckie worries it could create problems for dental offices.
I had several phone calls today of seniors wanting to access this plan, and I think it's fabulous. But I can't land on the shoulders of dentists to register the patient. I think the patients are going to be instructed to contact the government, and that's how they're going to register. And things like that could be very problematic for a dental office to try and negotiate.
It is not yet clear how dentists will sign up for the plan, how much they'll be compensated, or if there will be enough dentists to meet demand. In the city of Thompson, businesses are grappling with a staffing shortage. Even the municipal government has a vacancy rate of more than 10%. Thompson City Manager Anthony McInnes says they're doing what they can to make sure small and medium-sized businesses have enough workers. McInnes says there's a push to build Indigenous partnerships and to rely more on immigration. He says the city's also talking with the Chamber of Commerce and other organizations to see which sectors are feeling the staff shortage most.
We hear anecdotally a lot when our meetings with the Chamber as well. We hear what the needs are, but we really have to put that together and then do some targeting recruiting for that, whether it's in Canada or whether it's on immigrants to Canada.
The city of Thompson hopes to launch a northern immigration program to help get skilled trades jobs filled. The director of CSIS was in Winnipeg yesterday talking about the human costs of foreign interference. David Vigneault told a crowd at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights some of Canada's adversaries have no limits on what they'll try to do to infiltrate Canadian society and to repress critics. He uses the example of the People's Republic of China.
No one should be under any illusion about the breadth of the PRC's efforts to infiltrate our political systems, our private sector, government institutions, universities, and communities from coast to coast to coast.
Vigneault says the human toll of human interference directly affects Canadians, of foreign interference that is, affects Canadians by eroding their ability to express their opinions and putting their lives in danger. You can hear more news throughout the morning right here on CBC Radio 1, and you can find more Manitoba news updated throughout the day at cbc.ca/Manitoba.
Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.
That was Heather Wells from the CBC News Desk, and joining us now in studio is Pat Canuga with one last look at the weather and the roads.
Kind of a good-looking morning out there, isn't it? It's a very bright morning here in the downtown. Looking at satellite imagery, lots of clear sky now, a little bit more clear than it was 2 to 3 hours ago when we got in here, but a good-looking day. We'll see a mix of sun and clouds today, and a -7. We've been hovering at -11 the past couple of hours here in the city of Winnipeg. Tonight, we could get cold. Environment Canada says -18 for the overnight. John has us a little bit warmer, but looks to be the coldest night of the next several. And tomorrow, we will get to a daytime high of -2 with some sunshine, at least a 3 on Thursday and Friday, a +1 with a mix of sun and clouds. So a lot more sunshine this week than we've seen the past couple of weeks with lots of clouds. So once again, we're -11 right now, -15 in Brandon, on the way today to a daytime high of -6. And Thompson, you're -17, some light snow. Temperature's going to fall a couple of degrees to -19 and then rise throughout the day. Well, enjoy your Tuesday, everyone. Thank you for listening to Information Radio. Appreciate it very much. So have a fabulous one.
Well, you too, Pat.
Thanks
for everything this morning. Thanks also to Abby Adeyemi at the controls and to Travis Peterson, who produces our CBC Manitoba YouTube channel. It's been great having all of you listening with us this morning. Hope you bundle up. Hope you enjoy those glimpses of the sun up there in the sky today. I'm Emily Brass, and I'll be back tomorrow on Information Radio. The Current is up next.